This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate third part of What If Naruto Destroyed Madara's Great Plan. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no time, let's start the story.
Taken from the National Intelligence Estimate on Fire Country that was presented to Cloud's daimyo. In Fire's successful rebuilding effort of the country's infrastructure has brought renewed prosperity and has reduced popular support for the insurrection. Patriots of the disposed regime are finding it increasingly hard to operate within the land as support for the nationalist cause is fast disappearing among the population. The window of opportunity obtained by Muromachi's actions during the final days of Fire's conquest of Tea is now closed. Thanks to the strategies devised by Sarutobi Hiruzen, the retired 3rd Hokage of Konoha and commander of Root Division of Fire's Ninja Corps, infiltration operations have increased vastly in effectiveness to the extent that 7 of the last 8 insertion attempts by both Rock and Cloud have ended in failure. The port and the shipyard have now been open for 2 years and the blue water approaches to Tea are now heavily patrolled, starving the insurgents of essential supplies of the materials of war. In conclusion, the insurgency in Tea is no longer sustainable at the level of the first 2 years. Even though more than 3 years have passed since the disposal of the Yondaime Kazekage and in spite of the close friendship between the Godem Kazekage and the Daimyo of Wind, Suna continues to remain a shadow of its former glory. Owing to a number of tragedies that have befallen Sand Shinobi operating outside the walls of the hidden village over the course of the last year and the growing unpopularity and disillusionment with the government on 3 of the 7 provinces in the country, the position of the daimyo has worsened. Intelligence strongly suspects Leaf's hand in both instances, though incontrovertible evidence has so far eluded all investigating agencies. This state of affairs is regrettable as the daimyo is unable to act decisively against Fire so long as he faces a divided population at home. Though it couldn't have been foreseen, the ascension of Wave as a major trading partner to Fire and a prominent export hub as well as the cozy relationship they share with Hai no Kuni is cause for concern. Wave has recently concluded an agreement with Fire to station one of the latter's regiments within their borders close to the port through which passes 10% of Cloud's external trade merchandise as of date. There is evidence of a Konoha Black Ops element operating within Wave's border with impunity, though both Fire and Wave have denied it. Furthermore, a total of 20 friendly port calls were made by Fire Navy at Wave's capital in the last 6 months whereas Wave has refused our offer of army and naval elements to protect their boundaries. Wave has thus become a cause of concern and rumors of a Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi persist. There is now enough evidence to conclude that there is such a shinobi in Konoha's ranks, though the appearance and description of the nin vary. Moreover, the Godem Hokage hasn't deigned to return the Ichibi to rightful owners in Suna. Since the One Tail is a carefully held secret in Hidden Leaf, there are concerns about whether it has been sealed into another to forge a new weapon. Such a state of affairs is unacceptable as. However, evidence points that Akatsuki are also unaware of the Ichibi's location. Since the Cabal is markedly belligerent towards Konoha and has demonstrated their superior intelligence-gathering abilities in overtures made to Cloud and Rock courts, it appears probable that the fate of the One Tail will remain unknown for some time to come until Leaf acts. Interestingly, reports say that Akatsuki's failure in this regard has delayed the execution of the shadowy organization's plans. The question why the mercenaries would seek out the tailed beast is unanswered. Intelligence considers this a cause for concern as their plans may include designs on our own strategic weapons as well. In conclusion, with their newly assimilated territories and their enhanced military might, prosperity and political influence, and continuing lawlessness in Wind fostered by Fire's interference, Hai no Kuni is now the greatest threat to the status quo in the elemental countries and the biggest threat to Cloud's sovereignty. Today's tea was not up to par. Naruto complained, raising his cup in the air, "This tea is shit. What else can you expect in such a dilapidated establishment as this one?" Sasuke asked, gesturing with his sake saucer at the lavish surroundings across the table. The majordomo had every right to appear insulted, given that the establishment was the priciest in Konoha and catered primarily to the wealthy. Unfortunately for him, he was too sophisticated to humiliate Team 7 in that moment. "And you're a wanker," Naruto replied loudly, "sitting there swilling your precious sake, ignoring your unfortunate friend who has been cursed to drink this vile cat piss. Well, fuck you. You're the one who wanted tea when Sakura and I were content with sake." In the middle of the room, a man and his female companion quickly settled their bill and exited the premises. Sakura covered her head in shame as she sat on the third side, her back to the horrified diners. It seemed like her teammates deliberately made an effort to make her look foolish in public. Naruto growled even louder, "Bastard. Why I should gut you, then cut off your balls and use them to shut your trap right where you sit." With an equally loud and angry voice, Sasuke answered, "And I should strangle you with your intestines and paint the walls red with your blood, you pussy." Another customer hurried out of the building. The conversation would have undoubtedly gone on if the majordomo hadn't come to the table. "Yes, dear fellow?" Naruto inquired, trying to sound sophisticated. Nobody was duped after the last-minute performance. "I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the premises, sir," said the individual. Sasuke appeared insulted. He got to his feet and said in a nice way, "Well, the tea is shit anyway." Naruto helpfully added, "And the ambience sucks donkey balls, for the benefit of the majordomo. You might want to look into it, but seriously, what's a tea house without hookers?" After 2 minutes, the street echoed with the twin cries of pain, "Ow, ow, ow," as Sakura pulled her teammates by the ears. "You two had to ruin it, didn't you? All I wanted was some decent eats and some nice and quiet for once." She grew agitated and sped up. Her targets did not respond to her ire. Their swollen ears hurt so much that it was intolerable. "Well, come on then. We'll do things your way. But I swear, one of these days I'm going to make you wear skirts and sing soprano." Naruto flinched. His girlfriend in Wave, Amy, threatened to kill him if she lost her favorite toy. He was relieved, though, that Sasuke, who would normally be making fun of him at this point, was sharing his suffering in any other way. The Raven. Haired Uchiha had it easy because, when he felt like resting and relaxing, he preferred the government-run whoring houses, which wasn't very often. Thankfully, after 10 agonizing minutes, they arrived at the shared bath. Their teacher, Jiraiya, was indeed busy snooping. With purpose, Naruto yelled, "Is the hall any good, you old fart? Sakura-chan wants to know if there's any delectable piece of naked ass in there. If there is, she wants to hit it tonight." Sakura did indeed hit it. That's Naruto's head. Jiraiya cursed his students for interfering with his pursuit of his true art and calling, while Naruto shook his head to drive the birds away. "Remind me to kick your ungrateful ass, brats," he remarked, yanking his students out of the hacked spy hole. Thanks to his disciples, he wouldn't have to look for another one in Konoha after just 1 day. After he healed, Naruto asked, "Where are we going, sensei?" "To meet the Godem." Adding his 2 cents, Sasuke said, "Yeah, like you didn't know already." "You know what, Sasuke? You diddle goats. Well, you fuck ducks in your spare time. And you suck mastodon cock." When they got closer to the Hokage Tower, Jiraiya yelled at them, "Quit it, you two." The Anbu guard bowed briefly to Jiraiya before opening the door. As soon as they were inside the sacred building, Team 7 began to clothe their ranks. Now they filed into the room, following Jiraiya. Sakura, who was in the front, yelled, "Haruno, Uzumaki, and Uchiha reporting for duty from training mission as ordered, sir." Setting down his quill, Kakashi grinned broadly behind his mask, assessing Team 7 thoroughly. His children had grown up and were now adults. He met Jiraiya's gaze, and the ancient legend gave him a wry smile in return. He commanded them to sit down. After the group settled in, the Hokage's secretary brought them sugar. Free black tea. That was Kakashi's preferred method of drinking tea, and he made it a point to serve the mixture to everyone, even visiting dignitaries. After the Chunin, Kakashi remarked, "Less than a day in Konoha after a 3-month-away tour in tea and already I have a complaint lodged against your team, Haruno." Jiraiya eased up. Yes, he would later face backlash for his students' lack of discipline, but that wasn't what he had anticipated. Nobody had complained about his snooping. He really didn't want to be present for that meeting, not that they ever did, but everything had a first time. Why, if the word got out, he would have a completely destroyed reputation with the ladies. Sakura paused. "Request the Hokage to be more specific and state the incident in the complaint." In the backdrop, Naruto laughed. Sasuke also did so. For both of them, today had been enjoyable. After spending 3 months in that hellhole tea, they merited a brief respite upon their return. The pranks were just too good to resist at the time, but they would later apologize to the civil servants. Kakashi gave his obliging little darlings a stern look. "Promoted 10 times in the last 3 years between the 3 of you and demoted 7 times back," he continued. "Unfortunately, I can't even throw you in the brig this time around. There's an S-rank mission and it might be right up your alley. So, you're it." It was a lie to say that they would be thrown in the brig. Until now, that is. After all, the parties that were offended were merely civilians. Quite eminent individuals, but still common people. However, during the brats had to be closely supervised to prevent things from getting out of hand. Nevertheless, Kakashi enjoyed engaging in these games with his kids. Unfortunately, they were unable to determine whether or not he was bluffing in order to take appropriate action. Pure heaven could be seen in front of him, where Danzo had scattered the smoldering corpses of that vulture's minions. The masked Sand Nin thrust a leg at one of them, tearing apart the target's appendage. The sight made the Anbu laugh. Just the way he liked his fellow leaf brethren. Perfectly cooked, with a crisp burn. The Sand Shinobi turned to face his fellow countrymen and motioned to back off. Minutes after the massacre, vultures were already circling overhead, and Danzo's own would soon be sending a large team to investigate. Every Suna. Nin's greatest hope was to humiliate those bastards from Hidden Leaf and teach them a lesson, but today was not that day. Though that day was drawing near, Wind and Sand would gain far more from it if their adversaries in Fire and Leaf were kept in the dark about the powerful allies and weaponry they possessed until the very end. We think that the disappearances are part of a covert operation to weaken Fire's foothold in Wind. From the reports that our agent in Danzo's camp sent us, as well as Danzo's own official reports, we think that there's a possibility that one or more S-rank ninja are lending assistance to Suna. Missing Nin? Inquired Naruto. He had perused the intelligence summaries. Suna's ranks contained a large number of A-rank Nin, but none of them were S-rank. Danzo had taken care of it. Whatever you may think of the former Warhawk, he was skilled at brainwashing and preparing zealots for suicide missions. Or ninja who are on loan from another village, Kakashi clarified. So we go in and kill them? Not exactly. I'll get to that section in a moment, before you ask. As you are aware, Wind has also been vocal about Danzo's men's mistreatment of its people. About a year ago, they established a samurai regiment near Danzo's camp, and they have since periodically reinforced it. 2 regiments are now in the area, and another one will be there in a day's march. In addition, there are the various shinobi that are always hanging around the area. The regiments pose little threat without the Suna.Nin, save for the occasional unlucky ninja. If Wind moves with them, Danzo will be crushed. And our goal is to make sure that doesn't occur? Questioned Sasuke. No, Kakashi did not want the crippled asshole to be killed, and he shook his head negatively. It is true that Danzo's death does not advance Fire's goals, but Danzo's power does not either. On this, our reports are quite explicit. He's still planning a coup to remove me from office. A blind fool if ever there was one, since Sand was waiting for him the entire time. However, that isn't really there. Not to mention, I don't want you to kill the old coot, he clarified, observing Sasuke's expression. So, Sensei, what is the mission? Sakura inquired. Kakashi grinned. What else but to defend Fire's interests? In Wind, you will report to Danzo. You will ostensibly work for him and obey his commands. He'll give you instructions to find and neutralize the person destroying his units. This also forms a part of your actual mission. You alone won't perform the execution too quickly. You'll hold off on attacking them until Danzo is sufficiently vulnerable. In the side missions, you hunt any patrols that venture outside of Suna's walls in order to weaken her. This will compel Sand to withdraw its soldiers from the regiments encircling Danzo, restoring his freedom of movement. We keep on pricking Wind until they lose patience and opt to use a hammer to deal with the thorn in their side, at which time, we'll claim injustice and send our forces to enforce the law, Sakura said. Wind is the ally that Fire and Konoha desired for the impending conflict. However, since that isn't feasible, neutrality will have to do. Danzo is extremely helpful where he is, even if that neutrality is imposed upon them by a sword around their necks. The 3 root members gave a nod, and Kakashi thrust a scroll forward. A list of resources in Wind that might be helpful to you. Recall and burn. Sakura silently pocked the scroll. I'll say it again, finally. Never kill the old coot, no matter what you do. Kiba saw something unusual when he entered the restaurant to meet up with his team. The prodigal Team 7 were eating lunch and conversing quietly with each other. Kiba's skill with the subtleties of spoken language then came into play, and he waxed poetic. If it's not Naruto, then tattoo my butt and screw my puckered ass. How are you, my friend? And you as well, Sakura, Sasuke. Friend Kiba, you seem to be as foul-mouthed as ever. Come celebrate the delicious food that our chef has so kindly prepared for our luncheon, said Naruto. Gazing wide-eyed, Kiba gestured accusingly at Sasuke after he had recovered. When did he drag you over to the gay side, dude? Sasuke shot back, right about the time you started raping alley cats. Sakura guffawed. This was just too good of an opportunity to miss. Don't tell me you two have been doing the horizontal mambo behind my back, Naruto. Naruto gave his pink-haired partner a glare. Kiba took a seat after laughing. And drop that shallow, cultured act, you bastard, he said. An idiot could see through it. Fuck you, too, Kiba. Kiba gave a snort. We haven't seen you guys in over a year since we last met in Wave. As I was saying, Shino cut in. Extended mission? Sort of. We were stationed in T. Naruto believed that would suffice for the purposes of this conversation, even though it wasn't exactly true because Team 7 had carried out other operations elsewhere. Sakura continued, in actuality, we entered Konoha just this morning. Kiba gave a nod. Those Anbu captains are really pushing you, don't they? Sakura grinned. Indeed, it is the case. We don't have much time left after adding in all the training Jiraiya Sensei has been providing us. Well, Hinata, aren't we relieved to be just regular nin? Before the Hyuga could respond, the Inuzuka asked Team 7. We're on R for the next 2 weeks and then back to training before deployment again, Team 7 told them. Sakura grinned more, and Kiba could tell from past experience that he was not fond of the expression on her face. It was the same smile that she had given him when she had kicked him in the balls 2 years earlier. We know. Oh? With a quirked eyebrow, Shino asked, sensing that something bad was about to happen to his team's well-earned rest and relaxation. Indeed, we're going on a mission today, and it turns out that trackers are necessary. What did we find out when we checked with headquarters? Who would have thought to volunteer to be our trackers? Oh my god. With dates and plans for those dates, Kiba groaned. Anyo, Hinata questioned in her hesitant tone, where are we going? K's no Kuni. Team 8 nodded, intrigued but wise enough to know better than to snoop around on Anbu operations. They would follow those who needed to be followed and provide whatever additional support they could to the mission, and then, when it was over, they would keep their mouths shut and forget the whole thing. At 1500, North Gate opens. Assemble 3 days worth of food. The Suna Anbu entered the clearing by himself. White on black, darker than dark, he uttered, using the code that had been decided upon at the previous meeting. Might is right, his counterpart from Iwa shot back. The case cage expresses his gratitude for the loan. The Tsuchikage will be pleased to hear that. The Suna Anbu gave a nod. It's working, our plan to confine Danzo. We anticipate success in a subsequent month. That is good. Code for the upcoming meeting? You choose. Orange is my finish line. You have the night. Rendezvous is ranked 3rd. The Iwa Anbu nodded and left in accordance with previous arrangements. He and the other person assigned to the meeting would meet there. After a few minutes, the Suna Anbu also departed from his position. Wind and his allies would soon make their move, and Konoha and Hai no Kuni would receive their just desserts. She got up and stretched like a cat, signaling her men to break camp at dusk. Then she took a bite of the ration bar and the roasted snake and rat. The rat was the best, as far as snakes roasted on the field went, and since she loved rats, this was good. For a short while, she wondered if she could catch a couple at the end of the mission and bring them home to breed, so she could have more of these wonderful morsels whenever she wanted. An additional snake is what you desire? A companion of hers inquired. No, she said in response. I'll have a Konoha rat later on and another rat now. I feel like trying one of those right now. The man chuckled. Don't we all? He answered, tossing her a canteen. Distilled with water? May I ask? She inquired. He gave a nod. All right. The cat is eager to play again, so let's hope we catch something tonight. So, Naruto, what's going on? After the others had gone to bed, Kiba questioned. They were still in fire, so some teams would have skipped the night watch or had just one, but both teams were paranoid enough that there were 2. As for the selection of the watch, Sakura and Hinata got along well enough, and Sakura was allergic to Kiba. Additionally, everyone had agreed that it wasn't wise to put 2 Dujutsu users on the same watch. With his back to Kiba, Naruto assembled a group of Kage Bunshin and sent them on their way. We're not going to assassinate Danzo, if that's what you're wondering. I didn't believe that. If it were an obvious assassination, you wouldn't need my team. You would be shocked, but let's get back on track. There are forces operating in Wind at the moment that are upending the order that was established following Suna's humiliation. As troubleshooters, we are going there to restore equilibrium. Re-establish balance, Kiba said again, his smirk clearly audible. I assume then that heads are going to roll. Naruto continued, and it's going to rain blood, which is where you come in. It's okay with me, provided that you leave some for my teammates and me. Naruto answered, there'll be plenty to go around. What's going on in your life, then? It's been a while since we've seen you, as Shino said. If it weren't for the rumors we frequently heard about your many and varied adventures at whorehouses, clubs, and the like, I would have given you up for dead. Particularly the brothels. That's good to hear, said Naruto. It's hard work being a legend in the making, and it gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling that all that effort is paying off when my fans acknowledge me. Kiba laughed. So I guess you don't have a girlfriend. You guessed wrong. Ugly, fat woman with a mustache? Kiba inquired. Naruto's eyebrow went up. Why are we discussing your mother and sister? I thought we were talking about my girlfriend, he asked naively. Kiba gritted back. I'm gonna kill you first thing tomorrow morning, you bastard. Naruto laughed. Feel free to give it a shot. Anyhow, Amy is her name. You would enjoy her. Dude, you screw around and you have a girlfriend. How do you manage to survive? Since she adores me. She is aware of the lifestyle we led and the daily pressures we work under to perform our jobs well. Are you serious? I must encounter this angel? Naruto shrugged, realizing that given the type of life he and his allies led and the impending war, there was a good chance he would die on some unnamed battlefield and not be able to fulfill his promise to Kiba. We will observe the course of events. We need to think of a way to trick Shino and Sasuke in the interim. Any suggestions? I detest this fucking nation, the sociopath declared to his companion. You detest everything. Thus, please stop talking. Then, an idea struck him. I need to kill something. You're an asshole. Isn't that the reason we're here? Said the heartless mercenary. You hear me? I want first dibs on the next one. I want you to leave me alone. The hired gun shrugged away. Not like I care. That's because you're a shit-eating, atheist asshole who doesn't respect blood. The hired gunman didn't respond. I'm talking to you, fucker. And I'm ignoring you. You're a prick. The hired gunman halted and pivoted. You continue to annoy me. Most civilians and some shinobi would have died at its power, but he groaned in ecstasy. It was hard to tell if it was religious fervor or sexual pleasure. And an insane smile blossomed on his face. You. A massive killer intent directed at him stopped the psychopath in his tracks. As his partner's perversions took their toll, the mercenary stood motionless in front of him, but his eyes glinted with a murderous temper barely contained, promising a violent, bloody end to the target of his wrath. The psychopath eventually shook himself out of his ardor and cracked his head a minute later. Well, that was enjoyable. Could we repeat that? He inquired. The mercenary's anger had, fortunately for him, somewhat subsided as he snorted with revulsion and turned to face the road. Our mission is to eliminate the Konoha ninja. We'll get it done quickly, or I'll chop you up into small pieces and feed the slop to the pigs. Do we understand each other? The psychopath never displayed signs of feeling threatened. Instead, he would spit into a bush by the side of the road, adjust the weapon slung behind him, and set off, his partner giving him a short glare before following him. The pig slop was getting prettier by the minute. Perhaps he ought to try it out after this mission. Team 7 and 8 patiently waited in the blazing sun at high noon while the samurai at the head of their line took their sweet time processing travel requests. After 30 minutes, Kiba and Naruto were getting impatient and were just a few minutes away from having their visas stamped. Damn paperwork Nazis, Naruto cackled as he kicked a pebble forcefully. They were entering Wind as an official Konoha investigation team and had to go through the forms, which in this case meant waiting in line for the border stamps. Sakura shrugged, realizing that it was just part of doing business. Naruto snorted, realizing that he did not have to agree with the necessity. He turned to Kiba to offer his thoughts, but was interrupted by a disturbance at the head of one of the other lines. What's happening? He nudged Sakura and nodded toward the commotion as he asked. Sakura shrugged again, but her gaze was fixed on the man arguing with the Suna Nin behind the desk. She was especially interested in this because the man had a courier corps badge on his right shoulder. It appeared as though the two would fight, and the messenger would have lost badly, but after a heated exchange of words, the courier threw his trade's cap to the ground and stomped out, carrying his diplomatic case. Sakura gave Naruto a quick tap on the shoulder and motioned for the courier to come over. She would wait for him to talk to the man and find out what had happened. Messengers were allowed entry even in times of war, but Wind had decided to deny this one. The incident had no bearing on their mission, but it piqued Sakura's interest, and she knew that her superiors at Anbu HQ would too. Shaking his head, Naruto followed the swiftly leaving messenger, hoping to stop for a bite or two while questioning him. If he didn't get back in time to pass customs, he would catch up with his group when they arrived at camp later that evening. After spending some time exploring the small market on the far side of the border, the messenger went into a roadside eatery. Naruto entered the small, family-run restaurant and saw the courier sitting at the counter right away. Since the establishment was essentially empty, the blonde decided that the best course of action was to approach the man directly, so she adjusted the forehead protector that Konoha had issued and approached him. "Is this chair occupied?" he inquired. The messenger pivoted to the side, scrutinizing the teenager from head to toe while wearing a profound scowl. He said, "It's not," and turned around. Taking a seat, Naruto placed his lunch order. "Are you having a rough day?" "Hello, I'm Shijimi Hishinuma," he said, assuming the guise of a Konoha Junin, as was customary for Anbu and route operators operating abroad. Even when they weren't on a mission, they would disguise their identities from those who mattered, and they didn't bother to tell anyone else. Stillness. The reason why I'm asking is because I saw what happened back there at the border crossing. The courier turned to face Naruto as his back tensed. "Who is inquiring?" Naruto made a motion with his headband. "I have nothing to say to you," replied the man. "If I have anything, I'll say it to your superiors in Konoha, or better yet, to the daimyo's representatives." There really was a problem. Naruto knew the man was right to be suspicious of a stranger, but he needed the information. The mission's success depended on how Suna and Wind felt about Konoha and Fire, and how well his team could persuade them to see reason. The blonde cast a sidelong glance at his partner, convinced that he knew how to get the man to open up. Jiraiya had given Team 7 an extremely comprehensive education, with one of the subjects being how to handle people in a way that would allow one to extract valuable information from them. Naruto answered, "If you don't have to, you don't have to," and slid a couple of ryu over. The messenger looked at the cash offered for a few seconds before turning away with a look of apparent disgust. The man said, "I'm not to be bought," in a stern voice. This was an old game that the Toad Sanin had taught his students how to play, and he slipped another gold coin across with a clink, saying, "Of course." The messenger was still unsure. Another halfway across was Naruto. The man whispered, "I can't violate my professional code of ethics." 3/4 of the way, Naruto moved the coin. "You're not being asked to. However, you can complain to the owner about your day." When the owner bought their steaming lunch, his new friend complained loudly and in great detail, while the proprietor listened patiently. The man considered it and reached for his gold. Naruto smiled and removed his finger from the last piece. After clearing customs, he had to wait an additional hour in line, and by the time he got his papers stamped and arrived at camp, it was already dark, the food was cold, and everyone was ready to retire for the night. Since they still had a whole day of marching ahead of them and his discovery would not affect the mission right away, Naruto ate the food and fell asleep. He shared his newfound knowledge with the others over breakfast the following morning. Shino said, "That does not bode well for relations between Wind and Fire," after the blonde had finished. Naruto gave a shrug. It wasn't as if things weren't already heading up shit creek. "We were aware that tensions were high along the Fire, Wind border, but why would you refuse to let a courier with a diplomatic case through?" Kiba inquired. Sakura answered, "Probably because he was carrying a diplomatic case. They're attempting to incite a confrontation," Shino said. Sakura's expression turned thoughtful. "Yes, unless he didn't have the required paperwork with him. Have you confirmed that, Naruto?" As he chewed on the awful tasting ration bar, Naruto winced. "Yep," he answered, his mouth slightly open. "We'll have to tentatively conclude that Wind is trying to provoke an incident." "Stupid fuckers," Sasuke added in a supportive manner. "We'll thus lodge a diplomatic protest, which will damage their reputation. What will that benefit you?" Kiba inquired. "What if they accused us of being unfriendly and stated that the courier lacked the necessary documentation?" Hinata inquired. "But that wasn't what happened. Due to our strength, none of the other nations are like Konoha or Fire these days. Here, truth will probably not matter." Without further explanation, Sasuke answered, "They will accuse us of belligerent actions even though we're faultless." His team knew what that meant. It was clear that Team 7 had access to intelligence that his own teammates did not, so what kind of trouble were they walking into? "You imply that Kei's no Kuni is colluding with foreign powers," Sasuke, Shino observed, giving the raven-haired Chunin a meaningful glance. "Possibly. Danzo's arrival is just one day away, so I imagine we'll find out for sure then." The atmosphere of Danzo's camp was akin to that of a besieged fortress. Men, bare-chested, toiled away to dig a second moat, deeper and wider than the first, the back-breaking labor of which was making the air resound with grunts. The laborers were, of course, Konoha Nin, and as he passed through the gate, Naruto wondered how Danzo was keeping security when a third of his men would be exhausted at the end of the day and useless. Not good news for Danzo's men's morale, as it denied the old general the intelligence he needed to anticipate enemy movements, but Team 8 had not sensed or seen any Konoha nin more than 2 miles out where the Wind and Suna contingents had set up camp. A few shinobi stood guard on the wooden ramparts, and Naruto had no doubt there were others that were on standby in the barracks. When Naruto looked at his teammates, they gave him a nod. Speaking to their escort, Naruto said, "The camp looks forlorn." The kunoichi nodded. Naruto thought back to previous intelligence reports and noticed that Danzo's troops no longer greeted Konoha inspectors with the same swagger and arrogance. Instead, they appeared genuinely appreciative to see him and the others. If this wasn't a sign that Danzo's dick was stuck in the blocks, he didn't know what was. "Yes, during the past week, we have lost 3 more patrols, 2 in one evening." "Were the patrols moving in close proximity to one another?" Sakura inquired. The guide gave a shake of her head. The day was getting better and better, and Naruto kept thinking as he glanced at his friends. Either there had been 2 teams working all along, or Suna's hunters were self-assured enough to divide their forces and pursue Danzo's men. "How has Danzo handled the situation?" questioned Sasuke. "That's what Danzo-sama is saying to you," the kunoichi angrily said. Sasuke scowled, realizing that, at least for the time being, he ought to treat the elderly cripple with dignity. "How has Danzo-sama handled the situation?" he said to himself. "Not very much. In the last month, we have lost 100 men. Whoever is out there is very powerful, and those 2 damned regiments and those bastards from Suna.nin are making it impossible for us to send out enough men. The men are about to rebel." "That seems reasonable," Sasuke remarked with skepticism. He wondered what had happened to Danzo's incredibly skilled group of assassins. This was not the force described as formidable in the intelligence reports from home. Perhaps Danzo had not brainwashed as many people as the Hokage's office had feared, if he had used the majority of them in self-destructive assassination missions against Suna's elite, then that would explain the reality they had found in his camp. After making one final turn, their guide took them to a spacious yet functional tent. One of Danzo's aides nodded to the kunoichi. "Danzo-sama's meeting a Wind diplomat. The man wearing simple shinobi garbs with no indication of rank. He instructed me to send you in as soon as you entered the camp. When he's done with the diplomat, wait inside and don't disturb." After nodding, teams 7 and 8 went in. The K's no Kuni diplomat was a strong man, confident that he had everything going for him and that his person was inviolate. He conducted himself aggressively and spoke down to the crippled X.Nin, even though he was in the middle of Danzo's camp surrounded by the latter's killers. Naruto, listening to his speech from one corner of the room, wondered if the man was a brave idiot or just another commonplace nincompoop dressed in a bureaucrat's uniform. Following the official Wind line on the matter, the official responded to Danzo's complaint about his killed men by saying, "We do not have control over what happens to you and your men. If your men can go raping and looting, then they most certainly can live with the retaliations our civilians visit upon them." "Civilians don't butcher men like mine were," Danzo shot back. Although it horrified him to admit how graphically his underlings had died, he had to appear as though he was making a fair argument given the presence of Kakashi's spies. Clearly, the diplomat overruled the elderly Warhawk's objection, saying, "You cannot lead or defend your own men, which speaks volumes about you and your village. No, Wind Country is done with you robbing our brave but impoverished citizens. It would be wise for you to keep in mind that you are visitors to our country. We have evidence that the murders were committed by trained shinobi," Danzo insisted. "You say that? Given that Konohagakure and Hai no Kuni stand to gain greatly from your accusations, am I really supposed to believe you? No, that won't stand with K's no Kuni. Nonetheless, we are prepared to submit to an impartial third-party investigation in the sake of justice and to demonstrate our innocence to the world." The diplomat realized his mistake and clamped down, seeing that Danzo's eyes narrowed at the slip and that he had unintentionally confirmed Danzo's suspicions that Wind was a secret ally against Fire and had grown a backbone as a result. The Hokage was afraid that the former Root Supremo would become too strong, but he needed Suna and Wind weakened, and Danzo was the only one who could do it. "That's how it is then," the old cripple said with an indulgent smile. The idiot diplomat could not know how much of a favor he'd done Danzo's cause with that slip. This meant that the Godem would have to send reinforcements. "We'll watch for his response." Silently nodding, the diplomat could not disguise his regret for his imprudence, but Danzo was sure the man would quickly regain his composure and launch another offensive. "Now that we've put the issue of the dead patriots aside, I would move on to the issue of the positioning of the 5th and 11th regiments so close to my base," the seasoned shinobi said, trying to provoke the man even more. Absolutely not, Wind's representative stated in a voice that left no room for dissent or disagreement. Their purpose is to safeguard the general public. They stay put. Wind's official stance might have had some merit if their troops had been stationed anywhere close to population centers, but since the units straddled the only paved road to fire in that part of Wind, as well as the only watering hole big enough to sustain a large party of men for 30 miles, and were so far removed from civilization that they needed dedicated mule trains to supply their comestibles thrice a week, it was not. Sasuke, standing behind the diplomat and beside his allies, took a moment to stop picking his teeth and shot a small grin at the man's back, laughing heartily at his appreciation for uttering that lie. His teammates took notice of what the Uchiha was doing and gave him a glare. The Uchiha responded with a simple shake of his head and returned his attention to his toothpick. While Sasuke was engaging in such manner with his allies, Danzo absorbed the Wind Envoy's disagreement without question. It wasn't as though he'd expected the other to yield or even compromise. The diplomat was unaware that the only reason for this discussion was to help Kakashi's spies. He wanted them to convince the Godem of Wind's unacceptable behavior in their reports and the urgent need to send reinforcements in order to regain control on the ground. Maybe you could get the shinobi complement lowered. I'm worried that my men might run into trouble when they go foraging. Translated. If you don't move your men, I'll kill them and say it was a miscommunication. Wind anticipates that Konoha shinobi inside its boundaries will use appropriate caution. It is obvious that Suna cannot be held responsible for any unfortunate events. This means that if you attack Suna.nin and blame it on an accident, we'll take action to make sure your men have more mishaps in return. After a lengthy period of vague threats from both men, the meeting came to an end with an insincere toast of friendship, peace, and prosperity between the two, and the diplomat leaving. Danzo then turned his attention to teams 7 and 8, ignoring the official Wind officials' many outright insults and insinuations. Junin Aburame Shino, and Shunin's Haruno Sakura, Inazuka Kiba, Hyuga Hinata, Uchiha Sasuke, and Uzumaki Naruto reporting for duty. Sir, Sakura exclaimed as she and the others became aware of their surroundings. Danzo looked at the six with a critical eye. He mumbled, Kakashi's brats and Kuranaya's darlings, leaning his cane against his leg and rubbing his chin. It looks like the Godem finally thought it was appropriate to send me some decent help, he said. Have you completed your billeting? No, monsieur. As soon as we entered the camp, sir, we came to report, Sakura answered. Danzo gave a nod. Do you want to take care of your billeting or do you want a briefing right away? First, sir, the briefing. Grasping his camel, Danzo made his way to his desk, his assistant disappearing into some task in the process. After taking a seat, he remarked, the situation is simple enough. The men I send out on patrols into the countryside are slaughtered like animals. I've lost 47 Kia and an additional 34 Mia in the past month. In the past week, I've lost 30 pounds. My 300 survivors are on the verge of rebellion. It's surprising that they haven't done it earlier. In these conditions, any other unit would have. As to the tactical picture, I'm penned in by 3 wind regiments as well as an estimated 250 Suna.nin. You would have seen 2 of those regiments on the way here. The third blocks the highway to the capital. There may be more shinobi in the countryside, but that's pure guesswork on my part. In essence, I'm trapped. Sakura gave a nod. Can you tell us about the attacks, sir? All except one were surgically executed ambushes by skilled ninjutsu users. The perpetrators are between 10 and 20 in number. There have been more attacks in the east and generally less time between attacks, leading me to suspect they're encamped somewhere in that neighborhood. Of course, I could be wrong. And the exception, sir. That was a bloody massacre. There was nothing more than pieces of flesh strewn around of that patrol when we found it 2 days back. Unfortunately, I couldn't contain the news and it spread throughout the camp, which is one reason aside from being cooped up in the camp why the men are so upset. You suspect it's a different team that did this? Oh, there's no doubt. The attack happened in the west on the same night as another in the east. Couldn't they have split up their forces and chosen a new modus operandi as part of their strategy? Danzo gave a shrug. Possible, I suppose, but unlikely. My men aren't weaklings and I'd wager it'd take more than your ordinary run of ninja to bring any of them down. Sakura gave a nod. I hope you caught the windbags slip back there. Danzo replied. Yes, sir. We're probably dealing with foreign shinobi and not Nukanen. It's critical you find out who's helping Kase no Kuni and Sanagakure. Yes, sir. You need anything? Yes, sir. I would like the autopsy reports of the dead men as well as your authorization to cut open some of them again. Granted. We will also need a guide, sir. Preferably someone who knows the area and is knowledgeable about the massacres. Absently, Danzo nodded. In any case, it was unlikely that he would allow them to stray outside of his territory unaccompanied. We will also need the latest intelligence reports on Wind and Suna troop movements, sir. Done. Anything else? Sakura gave it some thought. She asked her teammates. No, sir. Nothing that strikes me at present anyways, as she answered. If that is all, sir? She asked, turning to face Danzo when they remained silent. Sakura entered their tent and said, guys, we're dealing with a Jinchuriki. She was staring at by Naruto and the others. Sakura gave me their frustrated looks before realizing there was a stranger among them. She'd made a grave error because she'd been so exhausted from the autopsies and so consumed by thoughts of the Jinchuriki. The man got up to say hello to her. Naruto introduced the stranger. Sakura, this is Ishimatsu Shintani, our liaison. Say hello to Sakura, Shin. Greetings, Sakura-san, Shintani uttered. Sakura acknowledged with a nod. Did I hear you right, Sakura-san? There's a Biju here in Kei's no Kuni? Sakura looked at Naruto, who shrugged. Now that the secret was revealed, the only option left to handle the fallout was to accept the consequences. Yes, that's right, Shintani-san. The man said, please call me Shin. All my friends do. I guess this means that one of the other villages is involved for sure. Sakura said, yeah, and then fell silent. Naruto asked, anything else, Sakura? Even though she was to blame for everything that went wrong this time, it was typical of Sakura to point the finger at herself. However, they were unable to pay for the customary one-day period of self-blame before she turned around. The more they discovered, the more evident it was that time was running out and that Konoha had once again been caught off guard by Suna and Wind's treachery due to Danzo's incapacity or complicity. In fact, the situation had gotten so bad that this very evening he would have to send the Godime a toad. Mail warning. She glanced at Sasuke and said, yeah. The perpetrators are skilled at earth and fire justice. The scion of Uchiha smiled and rubbed his hands expectantly. With his affinity for lightning, he understood the implications of the news for him. At last, the insane man exclaimed, clenching his fist at the sky. I get to kick a fucking Biju in its nuts all over the place. Dude, you forget that we're talking about a Jinchuriki, Kiba informed him. Placing his hands on Kiba's shoulder, Naruto shook his head to get his attention. Don't disturb him. The idiot's in his happy place. Team 8 gave Naruto an odd look. How strong was Team 7 really to not even be alarmed by the prospect of taking on a demon host? Danzo cast a suspicious glance at his informant. His ears barely registered. This was undoubtedly luck smiling on him. He certainly seemed to be bathing in her glow. He inquired, say again? Just to be sure. The person assisting Wind provided them with a Jinchuriki, Shintani reiterated. Danzo's smile grew brighter and brighter. At last, he could obtain a Jinchuriki of his very own. He was truly having one of his happiest days ever. Saying, thank you, Ishimatsu, he brushed the latter aside. After the man had left, he turned back to his assistant. He said, send out 24 of the 60, alluding to his secret reserve of shinobi who have been thoroughly brainwashed and trained to be wholly devoted to Danzo and his cause. Konoha was unaware of their existence, but they were the most trusted of all the men under his command, and they would not think twice to storm the gates of hell on behalf of their master. And get me that Jinchuriki alive. At all costs. Yes, master. On the road to fire, the 5th Regiment stood watch over the watering hole, which was actually a spring. A toad the size of a man floated to the surface just after 4 in the morning, when most of the camp was still asleep and even the guards were sleepy. A hand, then another, a head, and finally half of a torso protruded from its mouth. Gamakichi, thank you, Naruto muttered. Gamakichi remained silent. His voice was very bassy and could draw unwelcome attention. Naruto quietly withdrew an oilskin pouch from his shirt. Carefully, he cracked it open and took out a water-soluble capsule that measured 2 centimeters in diameter and a few inches in length. Inside was a concoction of germs that had crystallized and caused severe diarrhea, all thanks to Tsunade and her group of Konoha researchers. Wind would learn better in a few days when the majority of their camp contracted severe dysentery, if they believed that placing a regiment near a body of water ensured water security. After all, Wind disliked alcohol, but oddly not Suna, and there was no wood in the neighborhood to heat water. Kakashi gazed at the letter that was on his desk, written by the Wind Daimyo. The fact that it said nothing concerning Danzo's men in Kei's no Kuni was unsettling. Even more so were the demands, expressed in extremely strong terms, for Suna to receive the Shukaku back. That was really out of the ordinary. Over the course of the 3 years since he donned the cap, numerous courteous requests for the one tail had been made. But there was an unwritten agreement that Konoha would not give the beast back, so the Wind Daimyo had never pursued the matter. Even though Kei's no Kuni had never been fond of the arrangement, they were forced to accept it. Now, something had occurred that Leaf and Fire were unaware of, and as a result, their policy had been reversed. Next to the Wind Daimyo's report was Naruto's for consideration. Biju chakra remnants had been found by Sakura during her autopsy. That eliminated the possibility of any Sunanin and made matters extremely difficult for Fire and Konoha. Unless one was dead serious about keeping one's word, one did not bring a Jinchuriki into play anywhere, least of all on foreign soil or lend said host to another power. Now that Wind had turned against him and sent his kids to be ground up for meat, Kakashi was certain. Danzo was written by the regiments of Kei's no Kuni and the unidentified backers of Suna, so he was unable to remember them. Additionally, he was unable to send them more help because he needed to have the strength to survive the initial blow and the hammer would catch fire. The Hitaki thanked the toad that had brought the message, saying, "Thanks, Kosuke." Kosuke inquired, "You think I should bring something back for Naruto?" "Only this. There'll be no reinforcements and that they're on their own." The summon said, "They're neck deep in trouble. My hands are tied, Kosuke. Tell them that I have every confidence in them." With a nod, Kosuke called himself back. Leaning towards his letterhead, he sighed. Now was the moment to put his forces on alert as quickly as possible. More importantly, though, the Fire Daimyo had to know that war was coming and they would have to bear the full brunt of the storm on their own. When Kiba arrived at the tent that Ishimatsu Shintami and his 3 companions shared in the barracks, Shintami was sound asleep. But he was a light sleeper, and the creak of the door woke him. "The others want to go over some last-minute things with you," said Kiba. "After that, consider it. It looks like it's going to be a long meeting and I'd bring my things with me if I were you." Shintami just picked up the scroll that was by his bedside and rolled out of bed because he had packed his belongings for a 2-week mission and sealed them away the night before. He followed the Inuzuka to the tent designated for the Konoha shinobi, disregarding the sighs and murmurs of the others who were unhappy about being disturbed in their sleep. "What's the deal?" he inquired as he moved next to the Inuzuka. "We have a lot of marching ahead of us in the days to come and God knows how long we'll be out on the field. Shouldn't we be getting some rest while we still can?" Kiba gave a shrug. "Hey, I'm just the golfer here, man. But if it's any consolation, you mirrored my sentiments exactly." Shintami nodded, considering if there was a need that would justify calling him this late on the eve of a crucial mission. It was suspicious enough that he had a sneaking suspicion his Konoha comrades had set a trap. Even though he knew it was just his paranoia talking, he nevertheless decelerated a bit to let Kiba lead the way. He did not say anything if the Chunin saw what he was doing, and the two of them strolled silently until they arrived at their destination. Without pausing, Shintani questioned, "What's going on here?" He saw Naruto sitting in the lotus position, cross-legged, in the middle of the shelter, looking like a monk. Glancing around, taking in the details, he saw that the interior was empty, all the furniture seemingly hidden away in scrolls strewn haphazardly throughout the space. Sakura and the others watched the blonde, doing whatever it was he was doing, silently as they stood huddled together in one corner. The only cutlery in the area was a big metal bowl that was filled and kept in a different corner. It was the kind of bowl used for washing one's feet. Upon entering the tent, this was definitely not what he had anticipated. Sakura gestured for silence, and the Danzo supporter shrugged. He would remain silent, but once Naruto finished his thing, someone had to respond to his inquiries. For the time being, he would maintain his composure and not allow his annoyance to interfere with teamwork. Shintani thought back to the 3 days that had gone since the Konoha shinobi entered camp and Danzo designated him as their liaison while they waited for Naruto to awaken from his daze. He had no doubt that the Godime's nin had purposefully made his life difficult by being uncooperative, despite the apparent display of friendship. What other explanation could there be for the fact that none of the 6 provided any information to him until he specifically asked for it, despite the fact he knew they were highly skilled operators from various intelligence reports and his own observations? Additionally, they always told him after the fact and did not involve him in decision-making. If that wasn't already a significant inconvenience, they deliberately kept him in the dark until the very last minute when they finally did decide to take action. Like, say, this very moment. Naturally, he had voiced his concerns to Sakura, who, despite martial logic, appeared to be leading the small group. It didn't matter that according to the manual, Aburame should have been in charge since he was higher up than her, but she had disregarded him. A part of him knew they were worried about security and did not trust Danzo very much, To be quite honest, though, he found their actions to be pretty foolish. He did not mean any harm to them, even though he spied on them for his master and reported to his leader every day. They all stood on the same side and would do so until Danzo Sama's objectives diverged from those of the ruling class in Konoha at some point in the future. Naruto opened his eyes now, making Shintami put his thoughts aside for the moment. Somehow, during his trance, the blonde's pupils had changed, but the others were going to be very disappointed if they were expecting to see Danzo's servant's response. But he wondered what the blonde had done to himself to change those unsettling eyes, and why they were acting that way. Unaffected by the tense atmosphere, Naruto confidently announced, "Yep, found the spot," slapping his thigh with satisfaction. "Bug.boy, could you move that basin over here?" he asked Shino. In obedience, the Aburame moved. After a moment, Naruto furrowed his strange eyes in contemplation and said, "Shin-san, you are after me." Shintami turned to ask what, but before he could say anything, the Uzumaki summoned someone and offered the required blood sacrifice. Suddenly, a Toad clan member appeared out of nowhere. As soon as the little Toad summon found its way, it exclaimed, "Hey, boss." It then observed Naruto's eye condition. "You addicted to the energy rush or something, boss?" "Stop talking, Kosuke, I'm at work," Naruto shot back, a little grumpy. At times, Kosuke was even more annoying than Gamakichi, the candy-loving, sardonic brat. "Yeah, about that. Kakashi wanted me to pass you a message." Naruto gave a headshake. With their liaison in the vicinity, he did not want to hear the news from home. The accursed informant would transfer it to Danzo. If the blonde had any say in the matter, Sakura's error was the last freebie the bastard would receive from them. "Whatever it is, it can wait until later. I want to port everyone in this room somewhere." Kosuke glanced about him. For the ride, there were 7 people plus an Inuzuka clan mutt, well within his bounds. Too many people, he pretended in an attempt to get paid. Back home, he had his eye on a cute little girl who had a sweet tooth for tuna. "I need help." Without saying a word, Naruto called forth a second Toad, mentally noting that he would make it up to Kosuke later. He was aware that the small man was trying to get a sweetener, but there wasn't much time left, and the man liked to haggle before making a deal. Naturally, the Uzumaki was aware that he could consent to repay a favor and move on, but he was cautious because of his previous interaction with Gamakichi regarding a related issue. If he rushed into another deal with a Toad, he'd be damned. He had been humiliated enough by the last one to live a lifetime. He pulled out a map and said, "Now, listen up," speaking just loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. He gestured toward a well that was a good distance from Danzo's camp and toward Sanagakure. "We're going here. Kosuke is responsible for Shino, Hinata, Shintani, and the rest of you follow or with Gama, Ona." Shintani suddenly realized what Naruto had meant by a Toad port. Clearly, the Konoha shinobi intended to give Danzo the slip so they could carry on without having to worry about constant surveillance. The liaison thought that this course of action was just not acceptable. However, since the escape had already started, Kosuke had used his tongue to draw Naruto in and swallow him whole. It was impossible to stop it. If the Leaf Nin attempted to obstruct the escape, he would undoubtedly face resistance, and if Kakashi's brats were killed inside the camp or their blood spilled, it would have far-reaching and extremely negative consequences for his master's plans. That gave Danzo's representative 2 options. Either he would accompany them and send out his own summons to inform his comrades, or he would refuse to leave now and report to his master. With the former, it was possible that the Konoha shinobi would vanish into thin air, leaving the exiled route commander with no knowledge of their whereabouts and a handicap. But the latter did not experience that drawback. And when the Toad's slimy tongue wrapped around him and pulled him into its gut, Shintani stood motionless, because it was the best of all possible choices. If he didn't detest the disgusting vermin with an intense hatred, then damned. 2 Toads materialized at the bottom of the well, and the few fish swimming idly by scrambled to the edges. As for the Toads, they sluggishly swam to the top, ignoring the local wildlife. They gaped open as they broke the surface of the water, releasing Sasuke from one and Naruto from another in a split second. Naruto's eyes were fixed on the sky as he emerged. From the well's mouth, he saw a stranger in a robe looking down at them. When his hands were free, he waved to the stranger, who gave a terrified cry and fled, taking his livestock with him. The Uzumaki noted to himself to let the Toads do some scouting in the future before insertion, and he mentally thanked his luck that it was only a civilian and not some shinobi who'd got the drop on them. When he gave the signal, Sasuke and the ninjutsu prepared to leap out of the well. Everyone was outside and on level ground a minute later. Naruto, who had assumed responsibility for the perimeter alongside Sasuke, gestured with his hand to the civilian who was running away, attracting everyone's notice. Sakura, who had been assisting the others and was closest to Shintani, saw an opportunity to deal with the traitor and took it. She stabbed the man in the back of his neck, neatly severing his spine. She moved her leg slightly to prevent getting blood on her person as the body went limp and began to collapse. They had barely lasted a minute of the insertion, so there was no need to smell like death and blood. With a quick smile, Naruto gave the Haruno the thumbs up. Everything seemed to be going incredibly well so far. Hopefully, extracting the grumpy spy would be as easy as the rest of the mission. Shouting at the Inuzuka, "Kiba, take care of that civilian. We don't want witnesses," he said. After giving his victim a nod and casting a disdainful glance at their previous relationship, the Team 8 member left with Akamaru. Out of retaliation, Naruto approached the well and gave the body a forceful kick. He proceeded to spit on the man as a precaution. He would also urinate on the bastard if he had the time. He cursed the dead and said, "Fucking spy," turning to face Sasuke. "Want to do the rest of the honors?" Sasuke gestured with his hands, giving a nod. When he thought the distance was safe, he burned the body with a gokaku so hot that the sand turned to glass. His companions moved away from the body. The body burned and the air smelled like perfectly cooked pork, and a black plume shot up into the sky. Hinata ran on her own initiative to the tallest rock within eyesight and quickly scanned the area with her eyes, even as the flames crackled and roared. The smoke would draw in hostile forces like moths to flame if they were present. Naruto turned to face his fellow frogs while Gama Ona used her tongue to catch a stray locust and then proceeded to happily eat the crispy creature from her perch atop his head. "So, what did the Hokage say, Kosuke?" asked he. "He mentioned you're alone." Kosuke shot back, averting his eyes from the fire. Fire was one of the main reasons he loved Team 7. He was a natural-born pyromaniac, and wherever his friends went, there was bound to be an explosion. Hai no Kuni's mobilizing for war, but he can't spare help for you. Naruto gave a shrug. It met their expectations. "That's okay. We figured that'd be the case. Thanks, Kosuke, and you too, Gama Ona." The frogs poofed off after pulling off the disappearing trick. Naruto turned to face Kiba, who was returning towards them, and began to work his tongue on a cavity. With his strong jaws, Akamaru was dragging their victim by his leg at the Inuzuka's side. There was no mistaking the man's fate. His neck was twisted at an odd angle. The man had no other marks on him, it seemed. Sakura inquired, "You didn't use a weapon? Just to be certain." He spit in the direction of the fire to express his disdain for the other dead bastard. "As if I'd do anything that stupid. Akamaru took care of it by himself. I didn't even touch the bastard." Like Sasuke and Naruto, Kiba hated with all of his heart. Likewise, the opposite was true. "Good." Absently nodding, Kiba bent down to examine Akamaru's feather shoes. It was necessary, even though the damned contraptions made his friend less proficient as a warrior and slowed him down. Throughout the ninja community, canine footprints the size of Akamaru's were regarded as proof of Konoha involvement. Regarding the bite marks, a plethora of tools were available in the market, offered by Konoha, naturally, that accurately replicated a dog's, provided you could procure saliva from a naive domestic animal. Several ninja villages bred rabid dogs specifically for this purpose. The Inuzuka said, "Well, that's that," stretching his back and clapping his hands in satisfaction. "Yes," Sasuke answered. Naruto flashed a menacing grin. "Enjoy your peace while it lasts, Suna, for here we come." Mounted on his horse, 3rd Restoration Brigade Colonel Saigo Takamori examined the 4 regiments gathered in front of him. His entire army of 5,300 soldiers plus aides and staff were arranged in front of him. The only exception was the ninja, who had departed much earlier because they were the assigned scouts. Of course, there was the colonel's shinobi guard, but they never showed off. The conscripts were in perfect formation, standing at stiff attention. A grizzled samurai, the brigade's color-bearer, stood proudly beside the colonel as the pikeman's leaf. Blades gleamed in the sun and the brigade's colors fluttered in the air. Takamori, judging his troops ready, gave his XOA finger twitch, and the bugler followed suit. The brigade and its accoutrements began their 3-day march to the K's no Kuni border as the bugle sounded, rank by rank, regiment by regiment. Once they were on the road, Takamori said to his XO, Lieutenant Colonel Beppu Shinsuke, "Everything appears to be in order." Nodding was the lieutenant colonel, who was a samurai just like the colonel. He answered, they could use a little seasoning. Takamori gave a shrug. Soldiers could always use a little more experience, it was a fact of life. Soldiers could always use more training. The pertinent question is, do you think we have trained them enough for the mission? They're steady enough. Having veteran samurai in their ranks to train and lead them has worked very well once we got over the initial hiccups. Funny to hear you speak of broken bones and dead samurai and civilian recruits as a hiccup. It had to be done. Indeed. Still, I've never liked executing my men. Among the 7 new formations raised 2.5 years ago with conscripts from the merchant and farming classes was the 3rd Restoration Brigade. The samurai class, who believed that warfare was the exclusive purview of their caste, became very displeased with this. However, the daimyo, who was regarded as the most powerful person in Fire's history, overruled their objections, saying that the recruits would not be a part of the regular army and would instead be used as garrison troops and a provincial guard. Only a few senior samurai, including Saigo Takamori, had volunteered to join the force after realizing its potential. The remaining samurai seed, which included the seasoned foot soldiers, had been provided by the government to the new units. All of the transferees had been troublemakers, unwanted by everyone. Some had a long history of disciplinary infractions, as long as they were tall for any number of misdemeanors. Others were misfits and incompetent cretins. However, they were all proud samurai who felt deeply ashamed and dishonored by their seeming descent from grace. Of course, there had been a great deal of hostility between the seasoned warriors and the conscripted farmers and merchants. After more than a year of rigorous training and some extremely difficult choices, including some involving court-martials and the gallows, Takamori secretly believed that the group was now as strong as any samurai unit he had ever served with. Naturally, each samurai was superior to 3 or even 4 of his civilian conscripts when fighting individually, but when they united with their pikes, bows, and innovative catapult artillery, they were unmatched. I don't think anyone does. True. We're heading into the furnace now. We should know how useful is this new forged sword and whether the dead souls were a worthy price soon enough. Shinsuke remarked, we might get revenge. He was a cynical soul by nature. It's your job and mine to ensure we avoid that. And what happens afterwards? You know what the majority of samurai feel about the new formations. Takamori laughed loudly. Oh, they'll all be too busy fighting for their lives in the short term. You've read the same reports I have. We're facing an alliance of lightning and earth along with a few minor countries. And now, there's also wind that's apparently decided to throw in with our enemies. And after that, the colonel looked straight ahead, knowing better than even his oldest and most devoted friend what the conscript army meant for his caste. His caste would have vanished from the face of the planet in 100 years. However, he had already made up his mind a long time ago. His allegiance was to his daimyo and his nation, damn his kind and their kind. Everyone takes necessary action, Shinsuke answered. If we win, we'll worry about the afterwards. The present has enough troubles, don't you think so? Lieutenant. Colonel nodded. I would that Hai no Kuni had more time to prepare. Your enemy screws up your plans. That's why he's called the enemy, after all. Well, anyways, Shinsuke snapped, pulling a new topic. I hope those assholes in supply come through on their lofty promises. Kuwayama Yachi usually comes through on his promises, and if he doesn't, we'll appropriate comestibles from nearby granaries, Takamori said with a smile. Shinsuke was Major Kuwayama's closest friend and the brigade's S4, or logistics officer. Mind, with war looming around the corner, I'd avoid that if possible in case we end up being besieged. Anyways, we'll see. ... She looked out over the horizon with eyes that were naturally better than any telescope made by humans, the midday sun beating down ruthlessly on her back. She tried to ignore the other things going on behind her back, even though the unfortunate water carriers who had been on a resupply mission and the corpses of the observation post's garrison were beginning to smell terrible in the afternoon heat. Kiba had argued to discard the bodies as soon as the Konoha shinobi overran the post and killed the last of the prisoners. The smell of rotting carcass mixed with shit was too strong for his nose to handle, but Team 7 had all collectively refused. The corpses served as useful tools for their psychological warfare. Naruto and his companions spent an hour constructing crosses out of the metal frames of the garrison's cots after assigning Team 8 to monitor the approaches. They crucified the bodies on the slope facing Suna using their constructions. Just in case that wasn't enough to provoke Suna, they also disemboweled or severed the eyes, ears, and tongues of the deceased Suna Nin, one of whom had been alive when the process began until Sakura kindly cut his throat. But that was not the thing that deeply unsettled Hinata. She had witnessed and participated in enough brutal acts against the guerrillas and their allies in T to have formed a mental defense system against such atrocities. However, she was sickened to see Team 7 working on the task while engaging in a lighthearted, whispered conversation. Then all of a sudden, they were not by themselves. Hinata yelled, "Inbound contact at 2 o'clock and 9 o'clock, as she noticed two distinct patrols heading in different directions toward their hill. Coming, Naruto stood next to the Hyuga. She made an effort to ignore his Anbu issue and the blood on his hands. Glancing at her, he asked, "Range, ETA and numbers?" The veteran Hyuga ought to have disclosed those particulars as well. Although he had previously disciplined her for such mistakes on the field, he was willing to give her one pass now that things were looking up. It had taken him and Sakura a very long time to learn how to protect themselves from the horrors they were compelled to commit as part of their trade, even though their first few months had been baptized by blood. And it still occasionally got to him. The one on our 9 o'clock is the closest. Range is approximately 1,500 yards. ETA is 5 minutes in this terrain. There are 12 shinobi in that group. The other one has 10 shinobi. Range is greater than 2,000 yards. They'll probably take 7 or 8 minutes to intercept us. With a nod, Naruto turned to face Shino and Kiba. "Either of you able to sense the enemies?" asked he. Naruto looked thoughtful as they shook their heads. "Okay, everyone, listen up. This is what we're going to do. We're going to defeat the two response teams in detail. We'll do that by advancing on the group on our 9 o'clock. We'll engage them in that level ground over there. I'll hold their attention. Sasuke and Sakura will hit them on the flank while I keep them distracted. Team 8 will be the reserve and hide themselves in that ravine just to the north, west of the flats. Do not worry about runners. They'll know reinforcements are on their way and will try to pin us down. But we'll hit hard and move fast. In case we're caught between two units, Kiba, Shino and Hinata will fall on their rear and relieve the pressure. Otherwise, I don't want to reveal you three this time. Is that clear?" Everyone was. "Good, let's show these Suna pussies what it means to mess with fire and leaf." The Suna Nin commander rallied his bolstered squad and launched an assault across the Badlands to recover the observation post that had been taken a few hours earlier by an unidentified force. He was aware that the garrison manning the station had been killed. According to their final broadcast report prior to contact breaking down, they were about to be overrun. However, in case he was unable to save them, he would surely take equal revenge on those who killed them. They would later return there to confront Danzo for his audacity in sending his assassins this close to Sunagaku. It was only for lack of evidence that the bastard had been able to evade justice for so long, but the Suna Nin commander would make sure that this day would change that. Even if it meant fabricating the evidence on his own. The commander slowed down and gave the order for 2 teams of 2 to attack the man on his flank after spotting a masked Naruto with a blade blocking the trail roughly 200 yards in front of them. But before the Suna teams could even start to follow their leader and make an attack, the blonde moved. The blade, wielding Uzumaki, was far away one moment and right in the commander's face the next, delivering a potent spin kick to the head. For all the good it did him, the Suna Nin raised his arm just in time to block the blow. The kick had enough force to instantly crush his target's skull when it struck his head, breaking the bones in his hands with ease. With a sickening thud, the resulting vector shot him across the hard, rock-studded ground, where he pinwheeled and crashed into a nearby boulder. The fact that Naruto's victim was already dead when he hit the ground was the only thing that saved him. The Suna Nin who had survived gazed at Naruto, wide-eyed at his swift victory. Even though their commander was a decorated and highly skilled Junin, the blonde assassin handled him like a genin. Taking pleasure in the fear that his adversaries experienced, Naruto mocked them by slipping into an easy stance and holding his ninjutsu away from his body. Suna's wounded ego was further harmed by the fact that he did not back down when the survivors moved to confront him. "I'm here to kill you, Suna pussies," he snorted. With a harsh curse, one of the Suna Nin charged, his weapons ready, exclaiming, "Motherfucker!" His teammates gathered around his defiant cry and took after him. But Naruto vanished again in less than a second, putting an end to the counterattack. He reappeared to strike the man at the wannabe Avenger's position, and the force of the blow caused the Suna Nin to fly back. The victim skidded to a halt after hitting the ground haphazardly from a distance. Fortunately, he avoided the visually stunning collision with only minor cuts and bruises. Not even a laceration, much less a broken bone. Unfortunately, Naruto's stab to his heart had resulted in instant death due to the ninjutsu protruding on both sides of his chest. However, even as Naruto delivered the final blow, the man's allies launched a coordinated attack in an attempt to take him out by sheer force of numbers. If the survivors believed the blonde was weakening after dealing such a severe blow, they were greatly mistaken. He moved into his attacker's guard as soon as the first of the lot got close to him, pushed him into the next one, and leapt clear of the trap. Naruto shoved his neighbor with a ninja, and the two fell together, with the neighbor screaming in agony and the other's kunai piercing deep into his arm. However, even as they were falling, a second Suna Nin dashed through the necessary seals and sent a chakra flare skyward, calling for assistance. The man came to the realization that, in order to catch the murderer hiding among them, he and the others might have bitten off more than they could chew and would require all the assistance possible. Simultaneously with his movements, the other shinobi launched elemental strikes at their attacker. The masked ninja was struck by sudden streams of fire and water, as well as wind blades. At the temperatures involved, water evaporated into superheated steam as wind and flame combined to turn the flames into an extremely hot conflagration. Before long, a layer of steam shrouded the area, obstructing vision and scorching and sterilizing everything in its path. The Suna Nin quickly moved away, avoiding the growing steam cloud and, in the event that he had survived, stopping their enemy from getting the upper hand. They would be even more disadvantaged if they were unable to locate him, and he managed to localize theirs in some way. And that was the last thing they needed to survive with someone as strong as their belligerent. Silence fell for a few seconds as everyone held their heads up, waiting for the steam to subside. The injured shinobi, a chunin, silently bit into a spare kunai and applied a field bandage to his wound before taking a shot of field anesthetic because any noise could alert their enemies. The potent drug would keep him from engaging in direct combat, but it wouldn't cripple him enough that he couldn't use the two ranged attacks he carried to support his allies from a distance. However, the steam did not clear for some reason. In fact, the more seconds went by, the thicker it seemed to get. Someone finally put two and two together and realized what had to have happened when they yelled, "Genjutsu," in warning. The last of the sand ninja panicked as they heard those fateful words and hurried to break the illusion. When their chakra coils emerged, the illusionary steam cleared, and the survivors realized that even their lightning-fast reflexes had fallen short. Now there were two fewer of them, and the injured chunin and another had perished. As they were actually becoming aware of the situation, a third person, a chunin, stumbled as a Sakura appeared behind him and repeatedly stabbed him in the back, piercing both of his kidneys in the process. Her victim collapsed to his knees, his mouth hanging open in a silent rictus of agonizing pain, and passed away from exsanguination. His neighbor gave the assassin medic a swift gokakyu. With the intention of getting close and taking her down, he charged with his kunai, but she twisted away from his strike. She tapped him on the back of his head with glowing hands as he stepped past her, and he fell like a puppet with its strings cut. 6 to go. After their numbers were cut in half, one survivor took a quick look at his fellow countrymen. He decided that tact was more important than bravery after seeing how easily his teammates had fallen, and he turned to flee. But before he could get 5 yards, Sasuke Kawarimi D into his path and jabbed a punch dagger into his groin. The man fell heavily and let out a loud cry. When Sakura entered the fight, Naruto returned to the fight after taking a hiatus for who knew what. With a skillful leap, his victim skillfully avoided his first blow and gained as much space as possible between them. Regretfully, the Uzumaki just Kawarimi D the man in the midst of the battle, sending him and his pink-haired comrade hurtling toward disaster. Before the Suna Nin could realize what was happening, the Haruno, for her part, brushed him with her deadly hands. As a result, he collapsed on the dirt, internally bleeding to death from a severed aorta. Meanwhile, the 4 surviving members of the original Suna force were in terrible shape. 3 were buried up to their necks in the scorching sands after being dragged into the earth by traps set by Kage Bunshin. Sasuke attacked the 4th, and the Uchiha quickly dispatched him with his ninjutsu, sending him down with a fine spray of blood to adorn his passage into the next world. The Suna team discovered they were under a genjutsu in less than a minute overall. With a heave, the Naruto withdrew his ninjutsu from his victim's chest and said, "I'll grant that steam attack was awesome, but that was anti-climatic after the anticipation of the last new days." The moron had rolled on the fucking ground, leaving the blade nicked. The blonde simply understood that such pricks, incapable of even passing away with dignity, ended up in a dark and unpleasant part of hell. I mean, the bastards did not even put up a fight. Thoughtfully, Sasuke answered, "We were more powerful than the lot and we had surprise on our side. What else did you expect?" Then, he chose to embark on an ego trip, for whatever reason. But seriously, who cares how a bunch of Suna fucks die? The only thing that matters here is that I was awesome. Sakura angrily replied, "Shut up, Uke," hefting a rock as she moved toward the 3 ninja who were trapped. While the 2 wimps had managed only 4 kills between them, she had already killed 5 and was set to kill 3 more. Their discourse was not warranted in the first place. Why didn't you enter the genjutsu earlier? Unaware of the thin ground beneath his feet, Sasuke scoffed. And miss a grand entrance? If Naruto gets to make one, so do I. Sasuke, should I kick your ass for being a moron on the battlefield? The Haruno ground growled. She gave each of the 3 trapped people a single blow to the head with the rock, causing their skulls to crack as she spoke. Team 7 could not afford to let the 3 die with 10 more on the way. Not that, after finding out who her teammates were, she could let them live. In addition, the Godem had a standing order to put Sunanin to death. But enough of the criticism. The trolls are no longer alive. Nope. Sasuke said with a smile, "Bastard." With a laugh at the byplay, Naruto clapped his hands to signal his teammates. Sakura and Sasuke turned to face him, and he gestured with his hand for them to follow. "I was starting to wonder where the rest had gone," he stated. "On me, my trusty sidekicks." "Fuck you, Naruto," was Sasuke's snarky response. Still, he positioned himself beside the blonde. The Uzumaki answered, "In your dreams," as he ran through the seals and inhaled deeply. The Uchiha flicked his blade to remove some of the blood and shook his head at that cliched reply. For now, the little shake would have to do, but after the upcoming engagement, he would have to clean it better. The Sunanin were now only 50 yards away and had begun their last charge. They were divided into 5 teams, each with a suitable amount of space between them. Unlike the first squad, they appeared to be fairly well led, and, miracle of miracles, one of them was a genjutsu user. As soon as the illusion took hold of him, Naruto dismissed it with a shrug because, although he was not particularly skilled at creating illusions, he was very skilled at breaking them. He exhaled the potent S-ranked Kaden Zukoku that was aimed at the 2 teams on the left. He had 2 incredibly skilled users for teammates, and they had been urged by all of his teachers to use him as a test subject. On that flank stood the Genjutsu Adept, and the Uzumaki's goal was to reduce the bastard to ashes. The fierce, blazing flames were too strong for the charging Sunanin, who were instantly destroyed in such close proximity. For hundreds of yards, everything headed toward the fire vanished into smoke. Sasuke and Sakura countercharged the other 3 teams while Naruto rained fire. The Uchiha entered first, using his ninjutsu to make an ostentatious yet quick cut. As his opponent sidestepped him, Sasuke's intention to divide him and his partner was achieved. Sakura charged in to take advantage of the situation, but before she could even strike, a kunoichi from the opposing team threw a lightning technique at her, forcing her to duck back. With his ninjutsu, Naruto dashed in at that precise moment. His next target was the kunoichi who had stopped Sakura, but her teammate had built an earthen wall to keep her safe. Leaping back, the Uzumaki reunited with his comrades. The Sunanin moved forward with assurance. Naruto hurled a feeble Daitopa at the ground, while Sakura unleashed a genjutsu. The blonde leapt high into the air as their enemies struggled to break through the makeshift dust screen and suppress the illusion. At the same time, Sakura sank into the earth and Sasuke charged forward. In retaliation, 2 Sunanin acting in tandem launched a wall of shuriken into the air, which was swiftly propelled by a strong Daitopa. After taking several strikes while in the air, Naruto crashed into the earth with force, crumbling into the dirt. The real Uzumaki launched a potent burst of fire from behind his attackers, and one of them raised an earthen wall to protect both himself and his comrade. The other sent a weasel into the air and slammed his hand into the earth. The weasel, whose specialty was wind attacks, unleashed a powerful blow as the roar of flames subsided, battering the area where Naruto stood and slicing through the wall like a knife through butter. The Uzumaki executed a Yomi Numa by Kawarimi-ing himself out of the way and slamming his hand onto the ground. As the wind user approached the end of his flight, an earth clone body checked him hard, but his opponents managed to avoid the mud swamp that had formed beneath their feet. Even as the clone crashed into him, the man stabbed it, fulfilling its purpose. The Sunanin lost his mobility at the beginning of the fight due to a broken rib and 2 more bruises from the blow. When the wind user's partner realized how the other was struggling, he hurried Naruto to give his partner some breathing room, but the wind user had the upper hand in every crucial situation. With a swift shunshin, the blonde easily defeated the weasel and stabbed it with his blade. Then, with his free hand still free, he advanced on his opponent, catching an errant projectile between the fingers as he ran sideways to avoid the hail of shuriken the earth user threw at him. Even as he threw back the throwing star to divert attention, Naruto's ninjutsu approached to dismember his opponent, but the wise man Kawarimi D out of danger. Nevertheless, the Uzumaki lost a portion of his left middle finger, and the agony of the wound would make the Suna Nin more slow to use techniques. With a melancholic grin, the blonde sprang forward, hoping to consolidate his lead and secure a swift triumph. However, his opponent had enough time to raise a kunai and point it, causing Naruto to run straight into the incredibly sharp blade while he was bending beneath the Konoha Nin's blade. The Uzumaki's henge disappeared into thin air as he opened his mouth to scream in agony. Another copy emerged from the side slashing, severing the replacement that the Suna Nin had left behind. Wind blades slammed into Naruto's back, shredding him into tiny slivers before he could even realize he'd stepped into a trap. A small puddle was created on the ground by the dirt from the mud clone. The wind user realized he was in danger and twisted to avoid it, but it was too late. The Uzumaki threw up his head, screaming and writhing in pain as the ninjutsu tore through bone and flesh and entered his chest cavity. The blonde gave a satisfied nod. The victim of that strike collapsed on the ground with bright arterial blood streaming out of his mouth, indicating that the strike had punctured the right lung. Perhaps more than just a portion of the lung was sliced away. The partner of the dying man gave a hoarse cry, "You bastard," and lunged forward. Naruto charged his attacker by leaping over his victim. They collided midair and launched vicious punches at each other. The enemy fought with a kunai while the Uzumaki attacked with his blade, but the latter had little chance of success. The blonde's blade skills were at best mediocre, but he was so much faster and more agile than the other, plus he had a greater weapon's reach, that the fight was certain to end in his favor. So when his opponent made one foolish move with his kunai, intending to cut off the blonde's jugular, Naruto used his free hand to seize the offending appendage in a vice grip. The Uzumaki then used the ninjutsu he was holding in his other hand to chop off the Suna Nin while maintaining a firm grip on it with a twisted arm. This turned out to be a grave error, as the blonde suffered from artery blood spurting all over his face, temporarily blinding him. Naruto realized he was in danger and leapt back to give himself some breathing room. Even though the jump did not carry him very far, he landed poorly and fell. Despite the stinging pain from the cut he sustained when his ninjutsu bit into his flesh during the fall, he released his opponent's severed hand and wiped at his face angrily. He was aware that getting his vision back as soon as possible was his only chance of surviving. After all, on a battlefield, a blind man had no place confronting even a cripple. Not unless he wished to commit suicide, in which case it would be fulfilled quickly. The Suna Nin fumbled another kunai out of his holster and stumbled drunkenly towards his target as Naruto operated on his eyes. When Naruto regained consciousness due to blood loss, he was only a few feet away. For whatever reason, the shinobi leapt into the air with the intention of using the force of his crash to fatally stab the blonde in the chest. It could have been that he knew he was only a few minutes away from dying from blood loss and wanted to go out in the most flamboyant way possible, or it could have been that he was a patriot who worked to rid his nation of its enemies even on his deathbed. But as he reached the peak of his flight, a kunai struck him in the head with a loud thud, ending his dreams. The man's lifeless body crashed into the ground and lay twitching as Naruto rolled safely out of the way. Knowing the meaning of that kunai, the Uzumaki lay on his back over the searing heat and thanked whatever god had blessed him with the victory in today's battle. That is, until Sasuke and Sakura entered his field of vision. The blonde grasped the Uchiha's hand and steadily raised himself up as he dutifully extended his. After getting back on his feet, he looked around to make sure they were the only people still in the field. He said softly, "Thanks, Sasuke." Sakura, wearing a regretful smile. Anyone could have experienced it, the Uchiha retorted. Hell, he'd experienced it before. Naruto laughed and strode over to examine their vanquished adversaries. One by one, he cut their throats with a kage bunshin wielding a kunai. The blonde liked to be thorough, even though all of them were dead save for the one caught in his fire attack. The lone survivor was nearly dead from severe burns. He was completely burned, with not a single area of skin left unburned, and he was constantly aware of his excruciating pain. The Uzumaki muttered, "Oh, shut up," as he lifted his leg and put a stomp on the poor bastard's throat, ending his suffering. He had two reasons for showing even this small kindness. They could not leave any survivors behind in order to maximize the psychological impact of this massacre on Suna's ruling establishment, in addition to the fact that it was the right thing to do. Clasped behind his back, the man with the spiky hair and one-eyed mask paced in front of his colleagues. He had gathered his 3 co-workers in the room, who made up their organization's inner circle, to talk strategy. As it was, they needed a new plan because their old ones could not be carried out. The mask. Wearer was furious because his plans to take over cursed Konoha had been derailed. Once more, I repeat. Similar to his forerunner or predecessor, depending on your point of view, that little worm Sarutobi had thrown a spanner in his plans during the Sand raid on Konoha 3 years prior. Since then, Leaf had completely changed the perception of the shinobi community, and the retired Hokage had driven the one-tailed demon from the face of the planet. There was a specific order in which the tailed beasts had to be sealed, and disrupting this order would be disastrous. And the Akatsuki had been fruitlessly searching for the demon's location for 3 long years. The man growled, "This is intolerable," turning to face his friends as he stopped in the middle of the room. The lone woman in the group pleaded with Madara to calm down. Madara spat the word out loud, "Calm. Conan, perhaps you've forgotten this little fact, but the purpose of Akatsuki is to capture the tailed beasts. Our long-term goals are contingent on our ability to execute that part of the plan successfully. And yet, here we stand, 3 years into the investigation to uncover the Shukaku, and we still don't know where Monkey Brains hid it." The black dot and white man with the Venus flytrap perched on his shoulders gave a nod. "Granted, our efforts so far have failed, but that's only because everyone who knows the secret of the One Tail are high-visibility targets in the highest echelons of power in Leaf and Fire, and we couldn't touch them without setting alarm bells off across the elemental countries. But, Madara, war is afoot again, and the time is nearly upon us when we needn't be so circumspect about our actions and their ramifications. Pretty soon, we'll send for Sarutobi and get the measure of the man." The man took 2 steps toward his seated accomplices and lieutenants. "Konoha has been victorious in every war fought since its foundation." Conan gave a nod. "Perhaps, but this one is different. They had allies to help them and numerous legends in their ranks before. What they have today are a bunch of has-beens who are too old to take the field anymore." Madara reminded her, "Legends are forged in the heat of battle. Let's not forget that." Conan shot back, "They are under attack from 3 directions at once." "Perhaps. But we will not underestimate Konoha like so many have to their detriment before. Leaf has a way of throwing surprises, as I can well attest." The others said nothing. The rank and file of Akatsuki were made up of bogeymen and shinobi legends, but Madara was a monster even by their standards. Any man who avoided injury during a battle with the Yellow Flash was pain. "When the time comes to fetch Sarutobi, you will handle it personally. I'm not ready to trust anyone else with a task of this magnitude." The man who had been silent up until that point nodded. "It'll be done once the war starts." "Good." 4X the ninja messenger was dismissed by Brigadier Mamoru, the commander of the fire garrison stationed to protect the main highway leading to Grass Country. Then, with thoughtfulness, he slapped the communique delivered by the recently deceased shinobi thoughtfully against his left palm. He didn't give it much thought, a minute or so. "Ray," he said to his assistant, "please call a staff meeting." Ray nodded and withdrew to execute the command. After getting a cup of herbal tea, the brigadier sat down and scratched his chin. Wind was preparing for battle with Hai no Kuni after finding allies. With their betrayal, Fire was truly caught with their pants down, and the nation was scrambling to get ready for a war that was probably just a few weeks away. And Cloud's brigade was in for some very interesting times if he was involved. 4X just a few minutes prior, General Sarutobi Hiruzen examined the missive that had been personally delivered by messenger summons. Although Fire's adversaries had effectively deceived Hai no Kuni's intelligence network and concealed their war preparations until it was nearly too late to respond, he was not overly shocked. After all, Fire and Leaf weren't the only ones with competent people. The evidence at hand indicated that Fire was going to be hit hard by their enemies, most likely from multiple axes at once, so Sarutobi thought it was fortunate that Fire had also been preparing for a hot war in the near future. Though he remained skeptical during the initial months, he was optimistic about Fire's prospects in the long run. The initial strikes would be the most severe since they would not only have to fight on several fronts, but also against an overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Hopefully, Hai no Kuni's readiness was sufficient to withstand the initial assault. Thanks to the conquest of Tea, Fire had a strong blue water navy to protect their shipping, and they were also fortunate to have excellent internal communication and logistics. It would be easy to blockade their ports and use their navy to threaten the enemy's seaborne merchant traffic. In addition, Konoha had been building the new unit covertly for the previous 3 years. Additionally, the daimyo had proposed new volunteer formations to take into account. Sarutobi took his quill in his hand. He knew exactly which unit to send to support Konoha's frontline units because the insurgency in T was dying and didn't require as many nin to fight as it had in the past. 4x Everyone was aware that the elderly man enjoyed raising pigeons. Living alone, he provided inexpensive breakfast and lunch to laborers working the rice fields. He also made weekly deliveries of pigs to the quartermaster of the nearby grass country garrison. Despite making a pitiful living, he was friendly and had a kind heart. Though he had only been in the area for 10 years, he had become so well liked and helpful to others that the community welcomed him. No one monitored him, and no one suspected that he was a spy. The elderly man was actually a sleeper agent. Fire had planted him specifically to keep an eye on the only route passable through Kusa no Kuni between Tsuchi no Kuni and Hai no Kuni, large enough to support a cavalry formation. Grass had been Fire's ally for a long time, but in the world of shinobi, alliances were always a moving target, and the old man mused to himself that it appeared this one had pretty much run its course as he watched 4 battalions of Earth infantry pass by his house unopposed by their grass counterparts. The old man spoke with his village friends for a short while that afternoon after the bustle of lunch ended. He went to tend to his pigeons on the roof after that. He chose a very special one, the one he'd purchased from a traveling merchant and had kept imprisoned ever since. He then fed the bird its finest meal ever and let it out of its cage. Because there were 3 tiny gold piplets in the feed, it was also the most expensive treat it had ever been. The homing pigeon left for Hai no Kuni a few minutes later. Teams 7 and 8 deliberately moved forward, with Suna Nin to their rear and sides, in the direction of an unidentified force with a Jinchuriki among its members. Naruto realized that the Sand Shinobi were misinterpreting their situation, even though they believed they had the intruders trapped. In this absurd drama, he and his allies were the hunters, not the hunted. He had them where he wanted them, even though the stupid Suna sods were unaware of it yet. When they eventually topped a dune and the low hill that served as their target came into sight, Naruto growled, "Hinata, report?" The position is undefended, the Byakugan user shot back, momentarily bringing her ethereal eyes into focus. Enemy dispositions on the flanks and the rear remain the same relative to ours. There is no sign of the Jinchuriki as of yet on our van. "Well done, Hinata," the blonde exclaimed as they resumed their leisurely jog up the hill, which they had been doing all day. He then turned to face Shino and Kiba. "Do either of you sense anything that Hinata's missed?" "Not at this moment," Shino said with ease. "Well," Sakura gave a nod. "We will stick to the plan. Hinata, Shino and Kiba, you're our medical party, observer section and our operational reserve. Naruto, you're in charge of command and communication. You're also in charge of security in our rear and our flanks. Keep the Suna Nin on our tail and our sides away from Sasuke and I at all cost. The 2 of us are responsible for the Jinchuriki and that's going to be a bitch and a half by itself with us fresh and rested." To ensure that everyone knew exactly what their responsibilities were, they all reiterated their tasking. Naruto unveiled a tent, short-range encrypted radios for communication, and the massive water canteens they had taken from the overrun Suna observation post once they reached the top of the hill. While Hinata and Sakura distributed blood and chakra pills, Sasuke prepared energy rations. While Shino started mining the area with explosive tags on kunai, Kiba took care of Akamaru, taking off the dog's feather shoes for the first time in several days. Both were abundant, and whenever anyone but his allies came near them, his Kikai bugs would explode the tags. While Shino went about his business, Naruto took care of nature, using earth techniques to smash boulders that blocked the line of fire in a rough circle a few hundred yards in radius from the top of the hill. At last, a canopy was raised to provide them with shade. Everything was prepared. Danzo stood on the rampart of his small fort and glared evilly at the wide open spaces of Wind Country. He was furious that Ishimatsu had vanished along with Kakashi's bastard children, who had gone missing. He was aware that the latter was most likely one with his ancestors. The former commander of the Roots was more worried that he wouldn't be able to obtain the nameless Jinchuriki than he was about what would happen to his subordinate. Knowing the answer, he asked his assistant, "Any news from the hunters?" It was impossible to let Kakashi obtain another Jinchuriki. "Nothing positive so far, Danzo. Sama. They haven't made contact with the enemy still." Danzo felt differently, but he nodded calmly. For several weeks, the search for the Jinchuriki and its companions had been ongoing, with disappointing outcomes. "I hope Kakashi's darlings would experience the same difficulties as his route. Let's get out of this heat. Events will unfold as they will and there's precious little we can do from here. The day is young yet and we have yet another meeting with that prick of a diplomat, his name Koiso. I wonder what new threats the bastard will make today." The Kunoichi groaned, "I hate this fucking desert," as she and her group jogged toward their objective. Her closest friend, their Suna liaison, laughed. "You're not the type to complain, Yugito," he smiled back at her. Some of us aren't attuned to this abominable desert heat, thank you, replied Yugito. Tell me again why the hell we are breaking OPSEC by racing across the fucking desert in broad daylight with stealth thrown to the winds like this. A post close to Suna was overrun by an unknown force. The enemy massacred the units sent to retake it before they retreated. The council thinks Danzo's involved, but even if he isn't, they want the belligerents killed as an abject lesson to San's enemies. Teams of Suna Nin are herding the bastards towards us and we're to execute them when they run into us. She questioned, so why aren't we planning an ambush? Because our opponents are powerful and this sandy expanse isn't good ground for a drawn-out battle. We'll be out of the dunes and into the Badlands 10 minutes from now and there are plenty of spots there to set up a good ambush. And this powerful enemy is going to walk into a trap. Tell me, Kuribayashi, wouldn't the enemy know they're being herded in this direction for some reason? What if they do something else? Each of the herding parties is more than 50 members strong. The enemy has no choice but to run towards us and we have you. Yes, we do have me, she muttered back, frowning. She was not pleased at all with the state of affairs right now. Her Suna fellows appeared to believe that, simply by virtue of her status as a Jinchuriki, the result of every conflict was predetermined. However, she was only the host of the Two-Tail, and if Konoha was involved in any way, she believed San's counsel to be correct, then there would be more reason to be concerned about the rumors of Konoha's nine-tailed Jinchuriki. Get in touch, Hinata declared sharply, two-man party of scouts at 6 o'clock. With a roll of his shoulders and a crack of his knuckles, Naruto straightened in his seat. With a cheeky swig of water, he said, well, it's time to rock and roll. Sit back and enjoy the show, guys. You're going to see something special. Sasuke and Kiba guffawed. Naruto smiled at the two and gave a Kage Bunshin hanged as a pebble on the command desk a few instructions in a whisper before dismissing it. Well, shit, vocalized the Suna scout. Better call it in, Sook.1. We're going to have to dig these bastards out. Sook.1 lowered his telescope and nodded. The bold individuals were settling at the top of the hill. To provide them with shade, they even had a motherfucking tent raised. He became irritable. The least the bastards could have done was pretend that their lives were in danger, which, judging from the pedestal and other various accessories hidden beneath their awning, they weren't. He mumbled back, let's hope they don't see us before the main force arrives, or we're all for it. Kuribayashi yelled, shit, raising his right hand in the air to indicate an abrupt stop. Yugito inquired, problems? Yes, he said, nodding as the other team members gathered around him and he spread out a map on the ground. The enemy has taken command of Toshinari Hill and is apparently enjoying a siesta. Yugito lost control and started laughing uncontrollably. The liaison with Suna scowled at her. She shook her head and shot him, well, fuck if that don't take the cake. Next, with a serious demeanor, the enemy screws up your plans. That's why he is the enemy. Now, what are we going to do about it? We set up our ambush while the other teams dig them out. How far are we from this hill, and do we have a positive ID? Yugito inquired. 30 minutes. Thereabouts. And no, they're wearing masks, though there's a dog in their little clique. That's another probable indicator that Konoha's involved. Then forget the ambush. Let the others try to dig them out. If they do, well and good. We'll catch the enemy in the open when he's tired, beaten and running for his life. If they don't, we'll hit them just as they and your teams are running out of steam. They'll be exhausted defending their position. If they aren't overrun, and we'll make short work of them. Kuribayashi turned to face his fellows. They gave a nod. He called in their movement over the command channel, saying, sounds like a plan. Naruto got up and said, well, look who's coming to the party, with a jovial quip. At last, the main body of one of the flanking teams appeared. The men were being assembled by its leaders in anticipation of an attack on their hill. The blonde said, ain't that cute? On that flank, there was only one location where a reasonably large body of men could be gathered for an assault. He had planned a surprise for this specific group in case they showed up first, but he had hoped that they would arrive first. Naruto grinned at his friends as he quickly went through several hand seals. He said, Bunshin Daibakuha is an unforgiving bitch, out loud. As the explosions went off, the XO of the Suna group, located on the Konoha Nin's flank, was in the middle of giving an order. A fragment of hell descended upon the K's no Kuni Badlands, sending pieces of earth, flesh, and various objects hurtling toward stable low Earth orbits. 30. 9 Sunain lay wounded and 17 lay dead as the explosions subsided and the debris began to rain down. 3 shinobi miraculously survived the Holocaust unharmed. After only 3 seconds, they were skewered by Cage Bunshin with Chidori in their hands. The clones gave their victims no opportunity to defend themselves when they attacked from a distance of less than 20 yards, or point-blank range for Chidori assassinations. More clones appeared, killing the 2 walking wounded who were dazed and shell-shocked and dying in fiery explosions. Naturally, Naruto wanted to kill the other bastards too, but he didn't want to risk Konoha being accused of war crimes in front of onlookers. Fuck. Sook.1 swore as his teammate informed the opposing teams via radio of their friend's whereabouts. Although the existence of survivors from the first attack did not surprise him, in his 10 years as a ninja, he had never witnessed so many deaths in such a short period of time. His partner said, "You got that right. That was the Chidori." The method resolved the mystery surrounding the foreign shinobi's identity. It was unknown outside of Konoha. The voice became even more irate as it continued, "And those bastards are executing the wounded." Sook.1 glanced at his accomplice. The fact that clones refused to accept surrenders was a de facto rule of war. At all. Those unfortunate enough to end up in a situation like this with a clone faced execution as punishment. However, in the last 3 years, the majority of Suna shinobi had become so hostile and hateful toward their Leaf counterparts that they were all too ready to accept the worst. Suna wasn't solely to blame for the current situation, as Danzo's men also contributed to the violence in equal measure. In an attempt to stop his partner's tirade, he said, "I think it's that kid that did Ingara during the Chunin exams 3 years back, Goro." Goro's expression turned thoughtful. He finally gave a pale, assenting nod. Merely a handful of Suna survivors from that attack were ever brought back to Sand. However, the stadium was packed with civilians that day, and they had all discussed it. In fact, that single battle had contributed just as much to Konoha's notoriety as their famed triumph over Orochimaru. In fact, they had become the Go.to hidden village for wealthy civilian businessmen seeking some light labor performed on their behalf. "Shit, I think you're right. We'd better call this in. That bastard took out Gaara in 1 hit. I think we're about to get first-row seats on how powerful he's grown in the last 3 years." Sook.1 gave a nod. Everything about the day was getting better and better. Yugito approached Kuribayashi and inquired, "What's the matter?" as the liaison's expression darkened. "Just got word that one of the flanking teams got taken out." "How did that happen? I thought they had orders to wait until they could link up with the others before launching an attack." "They walked into a trap. Apparently, the ground they were assembling on was a giant trap rigged with exploding clones." "Fuck. Any survivors?" Kuribayashi gave a headshake. Then, to improve his hearing, he placed his other hand's thumb against his earplug and raised a finger in a silent gesture. "We think we have a positive ID on at least one of the targets." "Shoot. You remember that Uzumaki boy who defeated the Yondaime Cage's youngest during the ill-fated Chunin exams 3 years back?" Yugito said, "That kid? I'd always wondered if things happened as that legend goes. We have multiple first-hand accounts of that fight, and not just from fire civilians who were encouraged by Konoha to spread the story. The nobles were particularly enthusiastic in their descriptions. And yes, that kid. They've already sent someone back to Suna to report this news. He's probably with his teammates then." Kuribayashi gave a nod. "There's a Uchiha among them," he noted. "Then we really do have our task cut out for us. What are the other teams doing?" "They're linking up beyond line of sight and are going to attack en masse. Have them wait for our signal. We'll scrape the previous plan, and hit the Leaf Ninja from their rear while they're defending themselves against the combined assault. We'll be there in 5 minutes, Kuribayashi yelled into his recorder. "Execute." He gave a nod to his allies and carried on at the current speed. It was useless to arrive at the battleground breathless and too early. At the end of the day, you got your throat slit for such foolishness. Contact inbound from 5 o'clock. ETA 3 minutes. Strength upwards of 100, declared Hinata, taking a chakra pill to replenish her energy. Sakura slid out of her seat and muttered, "Looks like this is the big one." For almost half an hour, Kiba had been following the Jinchuriki's scent. Not a genius needed to discern that their foes intended to launch a series of sporadic attacks to surprise the Leaf Ninja, who were hard at work defending their position against the invading Sand Shinobi. With a sigh, Naruto whispered some more orders to a Cage Bunshin posing as a pebble and then brushed it off. He then turned to face his colleagues. "You know your responsibilities. Try to stay alive." "To victory," exclaimed Sasuke. "And splendid plunder subsequently," Kiba concluded. Akamaru agreed and barked. The words of the Inuzuka Saiyan made everyone smile. Meeting their gaze, Naruto nodded. "Let's do this. With a tiny sigh of relief, Suk.1 heard the order for the general assault on his earplug. Since he and Guro had escaped notice thus far, they would most likely survive to see the end of the day. "It's about time," mumbled Guro. He, too, was relieved to hear the news. He would never want to get close to anyone strong enough to defeat that demon Gaara when they were only 12 years old. At all. Yes, a youthful voice agreed from behind them. This infernal desert heat is unbelievable. With a kunai through the back of Suk.1's skull, he was already dead when Guro leapt to the side sensing the threat. He was thankful that he had avoided the fatal blow that was going to strike his neck, but he lamented that he had to face the Konoha nin alone. His opponent asked, speculatively eyeing the ninjutsu in Goro's hand, "And what are you trying to do?" Guro spat blood after opening his mouth to respond. Suddenly, the sound of birds chirping filled the air, and his last thoughts were to curse himself for not realizing that his opponent was a master of cage bunshin. Using smoke bombs liberally to conceal their approach, the charging Suna nin crested the final dune 500 meters from Naruto's hill in a straight line. However, Hinata listed the dispositions of Byakugan users in a monotone voice, demonstrating that smoke was no obstacle to them. About 15 teams of 2 shinobi cooperating well with good space between them made up the first wave. The second wave was 60 yards behind the first, but it was just as strong. There was no sign of the remaining sand nin. Naruto gave the scene a nod. Throwing 100 nin at 6 targets was a waste of time. It would be better to mercilessly use your numerical advantage to overwhelm them in waves. As Naruto extracted a powerful dose of the Kyuubi's chakra and created 2 clones, Kiba whistled. At a gesture from Kiba, a group of cage bunshin, situated 200 yards away from the advancing sand shinobi, abandoned their henge and, in a pathetic display of their inadequate archery abilities, fired a disorganized group of arrows towards the initial wave into the atmosphere. The Suna nin's first wave accelerated to avoid the arrow's trajectory, and their second wave slightly decelerated for the same reason. Holding his hand in front of him, Naruto formed a Rasengan while the Suna nin's attention was fixed on the arrows. Pumping all the chakra he had taken from the Kyuubi, he watched as his clones worked the swirling ball, adding elements of wind and fire that were directed inward. After countless practices at the Frog Mountain, he was able to propel the enormous amount of chakra into the sphere in a mere 6 seconds. He needed an additional second to exert the necessary control over the ball before he could shoot his opponents with it. The Sand Shinobi's chakra. Sensitive Nin had already noticed the enormous quantity of chakra being gathered atop the hill and had started to distance themselves further. They all intended to do everything within their power to lessen the damage that the person manipulating the chakra would do to them, even though they wouldn't have more than one chance to use such a potent technique. The issue was that Naruto's attack did not target their ranks. It passed over their heads almost too quickly for their eyes to follow, striking the sand dune that concealed the remaining Suna nin. A few dozen tons of desert sand were vaporized by the blast, which was a heat pulse so intense it tore at flesh. It was strong enough to topple the uppermost portion of the sand dune and render the 7-second wave members nearest to it completely dumb. 12 more were hurled violently to the floor. 67 Suna nin who had lain in wait behind the sand dune lay dead or dying as the mushroom cloud that resulted rose into the air and debris rained in a rough ovoid 1,000 yards long along its semi-major axis. Most were rendered unconscious and buried, suffocating to death under tons of sand with no chance of escape or rescue, while many were ripped to pieces and burned to a crisp by hypersonic sand and plasma. The reserve force survivors were hit so hard by the explosion that many of them would be rendered useless for the duration of the battle. It was the loudest noise the survivors had ever heard. Kuribayashi exclaimed, "What the fuck was that?" as the deafening crack of an explosion far away echoed through the atmosphere. He glanced up in time to witness a mushroom-shaped cloud ascending above the meteor clouds overhead. Yugito whistled gratefully while gazing at the cloud. The person responsible for the explosion had just used an enormous amount of chakra to launch a powerful attack that was comparable to the strongest the Nekomata could muster. Most likely, it was that brat from Uzumaki, and hopefully, that stunt would have shot him in the foot. "I'm unable to get through to anyone on the command channel. I'm going to try the squad communications channel now," the liaison from Suna said. One of the others exclaimed, "Damn, this sucks. Sounds like those bastards stuck their dicks in a meat grinder." Yugito remained silent. She had experience with large-scale explosions, and if the Uzumaki boy believed he was the biggest fish in the pond, she intended to give him more instruction. The blast wave struck the second flight of arrows while they were in midair. Out of the approximately 200 cage bunshin disguised as arrows, 130 made it through the fiery apocalypse, and 30 more sustained injuries. The wounded clones disregarded themselves, while the survivors changed back into who they truly were and got to work. They were joined by the combat worthy members of the first flight. The wood.be archers simultaneously dropped their bows, which had also been transformed into cage bunshin, and launched a fast, moving, straight, up mass charge. A dozen Suna Nin were crushed under the pressure, disoriented by the explosion and attacked by suicide clones wielding ninjutsu from both the front and the side. 10 more stayed behind to fight the clones and the 20-odd shinobi that charged up the hill after breaking through the wave of cage bunshin. Of the two waves, they were the only ones to survive. While some clones recklessly charged the sand shinobi, others, acting on their own initiative, had already executed the Suna Nin that had been knocked flat by the explosion. For an assault force that had suffered the kind of losses they had, the remaining assault force kept a fairly reasonable order. Even though they were losing their composure now, their resentment of Konoha drove them on, and they realized that all they needed to do was distract their adversary for a few minutes until their backup force ambushed the lead ninja from behind. However, there was an issue. They needed to get over the makeshift minefield that Shino had set up with detonating seals in order to cross the 200 yards of open land that separated them from their objective at the top of the hill. Furthermore, Shino's Kikai bugs were similar to bees in that they had no problem giving their lives in order to defend the hive, which in this case consisted of Shino, his clan, and Konoha. In 3 seconds the air was roiled by a dozen explosions. The blasts only caused injuries and deaths to 2 Suna Nin, but this was the straw that broke the camel's back. The Suna survivors had seen 10 of their comrades sacrifice their lives as a sacrificial rearguard so that the remaining survivors could complete the mission, and they had watched as 70% of their strength was reduced to cooked morsels. Their objective was to divert the Konoha Nin's attention from the top of the hill so that the Kumo allies and their fellow sand citizens could attack the leaf shinobi from behind. They'd gone through more than any rational man could have to finish it, but their promised attack from behind had not materialized, and neither had their allies. Even the hardest bidden veterans have their limits, and they had reached far beyond them. Thus, the Suna Nin that was still alive turned around and began to flee. None of them managed to get within 50 yards of their target in the end. But Naruto's clones weren't finished, and they pursued the shinobi who was running away. That's the end of that. Kiba shook his head inquiringly. Even though they were outnumbered more than 30 to 1, Naruto by himself was more than sufficient to repel the attack and thwart it. If the attack had not claimed the lives of over 190 nin, Kiba would be shocked beyond belief, which was an incredible number. Although they had the benefit of the terrain and had fought behind prepared defenses, the victory's sheer magnitude was astounding. Sasuke and Hinata both said, "Contact," at the same moment. Kiba was taken aback by the news. The Chunin scout had become so engrossed in Naruto's solo fight with the Suna Nin that he had forgotten it was merely a sideshow. True, they would have perished in the same way if the assault had been overrun, but a Jinchuriki was on the main course, and Sasuke yelled, "Scram," a warning. He heeded his own counsel and avoided shining near the hill. Hinata was regarded with disdain by Kiba and Shino, but Naruto and Sakura knew their teammate well enough to take his advice without hesitation. They knew everything they needed to know from her pale face, the terrified expression in her wide eyes, and the fact that she had performed a shunshin herself. She did not respond. Shino retreated himself, and Akamaru and Kiba thundered down the hill to avoid whatever was coming toward them. The entire world turned white. Yugito thought she would burst with all the chakra she'd drawn from the two-tail by the time the damned hill came into view. In addition, she had begun to change into the beast with tails, which was probably the only thing stopping her from blowing up the whole sky. So as soon as she saw their goal, she launched her attack. She then fully changed into her imprisoned demon. The explosion from Yugito's attack easily rivaled the one Naruto had thrown at his Suna attackers, and the Nekomata was a master of fire. They picked up Kiba, who was halfway down the hill, and launched her into the air. He struck the ground hard, breaking and concussing his head, and losing consciousness instantly. A split second later, a boulder several hundred kilograms heavy bounced off his right hand, a small Mercies. With multiple broken ribs, a broken tail, and 2 broken legs, Akamaru was left with a pitiful whine as the debris rain stopped. The young Chunin was buried alive in a coma, but the dog licked its master. Sasuke cursed, "Fuck," as he landed next to Naruto. He had planned to use Jinchuriki to battle an earth element, against which his lightning would be most effective, rather than a fire element. It's the two-tail and it's using fire. No shit, Uke, you're buggered for sure, Naruto retorted, as clones appeared. Even though his chakra was only half full, he still had a lot of fight left in him. In the event of a dire situation, one could also resort to the sage techniques, also known as Kyuubi. The two Konoha nin parted as the Nekomata threw another enormous ball of fire in their direction. Team 8, Naruto dialed into his radio, "This is way over your heads. Try to stay alive and engage the rest of the Jinchuriki's team. Stay away from the two-tail at all cost. Repeat, stay away from the two-tail at all cost." Shino responded with a voice that said, "We hear and comply. Kiba's WIA and Hinata's stabilizing him. I'm moving to engage the enemy." "Roger," the blonde woman answered. "Sasuke, Sakura, the Nekomata is all yours. I'll join in the party after I neutralize her support." Dodging another ball of fire, Sasuke cursed his luck as Naruto went to tend to the support. Confidential reports filed by those who had survived close encounters with the Nekomata kind during the previous wars had informed him that the damn cat was just as cunning as the Shukaku. It had the reflexes of a cat on steroids and could shoot fire, lots of it, pretty much a wall, from what he could see, but that was about all it had going for it. Put simply, the Sharingan user with raven hair was up against a monstrous cat that breathed fire and had human intellect grasping its reins. He had a problem because fire was his second element and he was a lightning adept. It's true that he was quite knowledgeable about water element techniques, but his water techniques were ineffective and he lacked Naruto's monstrous reserves to waste. But one thing was for sure. Remaining on the defensive was not going to help him win this battle. He whispered, "Where the fuck is that pink-haired wench when you need her?" before putting on his seal of power and darting in the direction of the two-tail. With incredible agility, the beast leapt several hundred yards clear of the path and unleashed a deluge of fireballs towards him. The Uchiha Saiyan gave up attacking for the nonce and used a Kawarimi to quickly outwit and dispatch an opponent nin who was facing the Sharingan user and standing at arm's length. Once again, Sasuke was unavoidably targeted by a terrifyingly large ball of flame, but he dutifully used Kawarimi to snag another nin into the fireball's path, narrowly avoiding death. He exhaled in relief when Sakura, after a long moment, finally made her presence known by throwing a devastating punch to the Nekomata's chest, sending the creature skittering against the ground. Subsequently, she vanished amidst a throng of bunchins, dashing off in all directions. When the enormous feline got its legs back, it let out a painful yowl and parted its lips widely toward the area it believed to be home to its torturer. The tailed beast let loose another terrifying explosion, sending friends and foes scrambling away as a massive ball of glowing flame grew between its jaws. "Fuck," Sasuke growled, avoiding the beast's presence. Using Chidori, he charged his ninjutsu and used the lightning he'd guided over the blade to cut the tendon of the cat in half. The Nekomata howled once more, but Sasuke noticed that the wound was healing almost as quickly as he was making it as he charged between its legs. That was not good news for Naruto's health in the short term, but it was still better than his healing power. As predicted, the two-tail leapt to a great height and began to breathe fire at his location once more. Just moments before the devastating wall of flames reached him, Sasuke dodged out of the way. He extinguished the flames and the stench of hair filled the air. There, he'd nearly lost his mind. The two-tail descended in perfect alignment for a flawless 10-point landing, and then all of a sudden, its head was knocked back and it was sailing up into the air. With glowing hands, the nin charged Sakura, who landed hard on the ground and swatted at him. The man's aorta was cut as he slumped dead. "What the fuck is Naruto doing? These bastards are everywhere," she said. With a grateful smile, Sasuke watched the beast take off, laughing at her remark. "I'm sure he's doing his best. How many more shots have you got?" asked the man. Sakura had discovered from Tsunade how to store chakra in seals, which she then used to power her punches and batter the monster cat, quickly depleting the reserves. 5, maybe 6 punches. After that, I can give you ranged support with genjutsu, but that's it. By now, the enormous cat had touched down and oriented itself. It bounded at the two Konoha nin, causing them to split apart. Sakura once more used her bunshin to blend in with the throng before stepping back from the fire's path and using a henge on herself to change into a regular-looking rock. After turning and breaking to the left, Sasuke counter-charged the Nekomata. Once more, he moved effortlessly between its legs and carved it from sternum to cervix using Reikiri. Any living thing would die from that wound, but this beast with tails wasn't even bothered. The beast went insane again, and Sasuke dodged the shine 3 times. He told Sakura, "We should stop meeting like this," as the battlefield was hidden by explosion dust and smoke. Sakura growled, "That fucking cat is throwing explosions like crazy," ignoring the remark as another massive explosion rocked the area. "Doesn't the stupid bitch ever run out of juice?" More dirt fell on them as a pebble bounced off her head in return. "Problem is we're not making an impression. We need to get at the Jinchuriki. Or you can try cold-cocking the beast senseless," suggested Sasuke. "Interesting idea. We'll try yours first. Where is the host inside all that flesh?" Finally, another fireball flew in, and Sasuke swerved away, Sharingan blazing. He approached the cat directly, scanned it with his eyes, and then turned away once more. Sakura appeared at its side and punched the Nekomata's foreleg, fooling it once more into concentrating only on him and paying a heavy price for its carelessness. The leg bowed at an abnormal angle, causing the beast to fall heavily. Sakura unfortunately ran into its mouth as a result of its fall, and the two-tail spit another enormous ball of fire in her direction. Before the kunoichi could flee, the flames consumed her, and the explosion flung her away, leaving a smoking wreck. As his teammate charged in, his entire body covered in lightning, Sasuke witnessed his doom. As he slammed into the two-tail's chest and tore through the flesh to its precious cargo, his face slightly hardened. With abundant energy, he arrived at Yugito and forcefully inserted the Gogyo Fuin into her stomach. When the beast's chakra ran out, it disappeared, and he fell to the ground beside Kumo Jinzuriki. Sakura may have died, but at least the two tails were sealed. For however long he sat there, the Uchiha Saiyan was oblivious to what was happening around him in the battlefield. A recognizable voice jolted him out of his despair, saying, "Hey, hero, you defeated the two-tail." "But I'm sealing it," laughed Naruto in response. "Get up, you lazy ass. We got work and Kiba needs medical attention." Sasuke turned to look at his pals. He uttered to Sakura, "I thought you had died." "I used up the last of my stored chakra, but I weathered the blast." "How?" he inquired. "Used all of my reserves as a crude shield. Didn't think it'd work, but here I am, so I guess it did." With a smile, Sasuke stood up. Laughing the entire time, he pulled his pink-haired teammate into a huge hug. Naruto turned to face Team 8 with a smile. "Are you ready?" he inquired. They gave a nod. "Good," he replied. "I'm sending Kiba and Akamaru directly to Konoha along with the Jinchuriki. Tsunade Sama will probably be able to help the former and the Godem must have custody of the latter." Sasuke inquired, "Will he be okay? What happened?" Hinata answered, "He got caught in the first blast. He's hurt pretty bad." Nodding, the Uchiha Saiyan turned to face Naruto, who was calling forth Kosuke and Gama-chan, the two toads. The blonde said, "Kosuke, you're carrying the five of us to Danzo's camp," as she conjured up a watery puddle with ninjutsu. "And don't give me any lip like last time about how you can't carry so many people." "I won't," Kosuke dutifully answered. Later on, he would get his own back for being bossed around. "Gama-chan, please carry Kiba-kun and Akamaru to Konoha. They need urgent medical attention. Also, deliver this scroll to Godime-sama. It contains the two-tailed Jinchuriki and I needn't stress the importance of this assignment." Gama-chan gave a nod and took off with her priceless cargo. Naruto turned to smile mischievously at Kosuke. "Let's pay the venerable Danzo-sama a visit now, shall we?" A smallish toad jumped out of the bowl of water that was placed in one corner of the room while Koiso, the K's no Kuni diplomat, was in the middle of another hateful outburst. He started to yell, "What's that beast doing here?" but stopped in the middle. With a benign look in the diplomat's direction, Danzo waved off the guards who had advanced to attack the intruder. "I think we're going to find out, Koiso-san," he remarked, observing with amusement the diplomat's response as the toad recited 5 of the missing Konoha nin. He muttered to himself that they looked much worse for wear and that Shintani, his mutt, and the Inuzuka boy were gone. He acknowledged the 5 nin's salute with a nod. It behooves a host to ensure sufficient privacy during diplomatic meetings with a representative of another state, Koiso said. "Surely, Hai no Kuni is not so far gone into barbarianism that you've forgotten your manners, Brigadier Danzo?" Raising an eyebrow at the 5 nin in front of him, Danzo ignored the blithering fool. His mind raced through scenarios of what might have happened, but it was unable to come up with anything. It was just impossible to guess any of the answers with any kind of reasonable certainty. Sakura said, "Danzo-sama, our investigation is successfully concluded." "Oh, I see that liaison Shintani is not with you and that you're missing one of your members," he said with sadness. These are the investigators appointed by Konoha to probe the murders of my men, Koiso-san, he said to the diplomat. The official questioned sharply, and what have they discovered? Sakura smiled and moved forward. That Sanagakure is preparing to wage war with Konoha once again. This time under the orders of Kei's no Kuni from prima facie evidence, she claimed. San have enlisted Kumo's help in this regard and have been using Kumo Nin to ambush patrols from Danzo. Sama's command. Shit, the ambassador angrily retorted. You have no evidence to support your unfounded and ill-advised malicious accusations. Naruto stepped forward and said, on the contrary, we have captured Kumo and Suna Nin who were working on that mission. You'll have to explain to your neutral Kumo allies that Konoha has taken custody of the Nibi no Nekomata. He then unfurled a sealing scroll and released its contents. Nibi no Nekomata? The envoy asked slowly again. Yes. Have fun explaining to Kumo how you lost the Jinchuriki they'd lent you. Danzo grinned menacingly. I believe this meeting is over, Koiso-san. You seem to have more urgent matters now, don't you? Before sending the Toad summon on her way, Kakashi gave her a small candy and thanked her for the scroll. When she was gone, by himself, he raised the cylinder covered in slime from his table, weighing it in his mind to determine whether Naruto's gift merited a smile or a frown. There would be much rejoicing in Kumo upon hearing of the capture of Nibi no Nekomata, and Wind and Lightning's relationship would undoubtedly be strained. However, it would also strengthen their resolve to continue their fight against Hai no Kuni. Ultimately, this meant that Fire was faced with a dual frontal conflict, just as it had when it had invaded T. But the fifth, interpreting between the lines, believed that all was not as bad as it seemed. Even though his kids hadn't given him a formal report, Kakashi could easily imagine what had happened for Konoha to obtain the Nibi no Nekomata. Somewhere in its deserts, Suna must have lost, and though more information was needed to determine the exact extent of Leaf's victory, he was inclined to think it was pretty significant. And because of the work of his team, Fire would only have to deal with one Jinchuriki rather than two on two different fronts. That, along with the new volunteer regiments, Fire's naval advantage, and other trinkets, meant that Hai no Kuni was in a very good position. He flipped the scroll in the air and asked rhetorically, and what should I do with you, my little pretty? He smiled merrily at the thought of holding the defenseless two-tailed Jinchuriki, Yugito, in his arms after seeing pictures of her in the bingo book. Though it would have been preferable if she had been a lover instead of a prisoner, it was almost like a dream come true. You want something, one? The masked shinobi in front of him was asked by the leader of the biggest group of ninjas in Rice Country. The messenger from the leader's Hai no Kuni allies was Konoha Anbu Operative 1. After T was conquered and Otto was destroyed 3 years ago, every nation and covert village scrambled to strengthen their defenses as the world gradually approached a new phase of warfare. With the demands T and Wind placed on its ninja corps, Leaf was unable to support a sizable garrison, leaving Rice in a state of lawlessness. Naturally, as the elemental nations maneuvered around one another for an advantage, Rice turned into a secret battleground for Leaf, Cloud, and Rock. The fact that all three villages and their parent nations had experienced various forms of restrictions on their freedom of action was the only reason Rice did not become the catalyst for a very public and very bloody free-for-all. The primary contributing factor was that none of the three secret villages in question had thought of themselves as prepared for a full-scale offensive against the others. Konoha found itself disadvantaged as their nin were involved in counter-insurgency activities in T and expanded their sway in Sand by means of Danzo's peacekeepers. Although Kumo and Iwa were not in a shared border with Rice, this was more than compensated for by a porous coastline. But they also had to contend with a native populace sympathetic to fire and an already powerful but tiny Leaf that was deeply ingrained in the late Orochimaru's fief. Though the safe bet had been on either Cloud or Rock, with Konoha coming in a distant third, if only because the former could bring more mass to bear on the battlefield, all three players had plenty of money to throw around and cause trouble. Luckily for Hai no Kuni, Jiraiya led the proxy war for the majority of the pivotal first year and had skillfully overseen his campaign. He first sided Leaf with clans that had opposed Orochimaru, and as Anbu wrath toward the traitor and his allies waned, the Toad Sannin adopted a policy of recruiting those who turned themselves in. Additionally, he had enlisted unbonded nin, a term the hidden villages used to refer to missing nin, for the war. Though not as skilled as Jiraiya, the old samurai who had taken over for him when the latter left command for unclear reasons was gradually winning the battle, just like in T. Rice was largely peaceful these days because of his diligence and the men who served under him. Yet the war of proxies was far from ended. If there was calm, it was only temporary as both sides prepared for the next war, which was certain to happen in less than a year. Momotaro. Dono requested me to personally deliver this communique to you, Hanzaki. Sama, replied the other. The leader of the Fuma clan scowled as he took the offered scroll. Indeed, the previous day, at the weekly meeting, he had spoken with Momotaro about a number of operational and tactical matters. Hanzaki had been reassured by the retired samurai that everything was well with the news from Hai no Kuni. What then contained this scroll? Thanks, one. You may go. Silently nodding, one vanished. Hanzaki flicked through the pages of the document. He then dispatched his second.in command. After all, they had only a year left to get ready for battle. I note that your report does not mention the fate of the two-tailed Jinchuriki, Haruno, Danzo said with a smile. Sakura said primly, we felt that the fewer people in that compartment, the better, sir. The cripple with one eye nodded solemnly, appreciating the young Kunoichi's deft sidestep. When Danzo realized the Jinchuriki was not one of the pals brought in by Kakashi's little bastards, his good humor at the Wind Diplomat's discomfiture had died an untimely death. Due to their battle weariness, some of them were so weak that his men could have easily subdued them. However, he was able to control himself and avoided losing his temper and ordering them to be tortured. Without a doubt, they had sent the two-tailed to their godime, and he was powerless to retrieve it. Now that he had heard the mission report from the pink-haired Kunoichi, Danzo was relieved he hadn't made a snap decision. How could he have been uncertain whether the Jiraiya, Orochimaru, Tsunade team could have accomplished something comparable at their age, given their remarkable victory at such a young age? With his students, Kakashi had accomplished something extraordinary, and if Danzo could somehow win their allegiance, his long-term objectives would be that much closer to reality. As he thought about it more, he came to the realization that he even had the appropriate tools for the job. All right, Haruno, you've given me a lot of information to digest. I'm going to have to think about the implications of this mission long and hard, but it seems clear to me that we have an unprecedented window of opportunity on our hand. Silently nodding, Sakura wondered when the old fool would actually get to the point. Why wasn't he able to be blunt and say it out loud if he really wanted to attack Suna? You're dismissed. Feel free to goof off for the rest of the day within the confines of the fort. Inform Uchiha Sasuke that I want to meet him at my tent later in the evening. Sakura saluted as she stood up. Yes, Danzo, Sama. Relax and get some rest. You've earned it and more after this mission. The field hospice was surprisingly clean, thanks to the orderlies, despite ringing with the groans of the sick and smelling slightly of shit. The commander of the Suna garrison knew all too well what was causing the stench. Under the enormous tent were 40 seriously ill men, and about 100 samurai were outside with varying degrees of run sickness. The commandant examined the sick and said, "Report." The attending senior physician scratched his chin. The man's uniform was shabby and he appeared to be very tired and overworked, but he and his fellow countrymen had done a fantastic job saving as many people as they could. For the time being, then, the commandant was prepared to overlook the man's lack of discipline. The numbers of infected has come down for the second day in a row. Hopefully, we've got this thing beat and the trend will continue to improve. How many today? 7 serious enough to admit and about 40 more that are infected, but don't need to be admitted. We've got them all quarantined, of course, and 4 dead. That's 1 dead more than yesterday, the commandant grimly noted. Yes, but I think we've lost as many people as we're going to. Oh, we may lose a handful more before we eradicate this outbreak, but that's about it. Good. How soon can the sick return to duty? The first one will probably be fit day after tomorrow, but the number of unfit isn't going to come under 100 for at least a week. The commander gave a somber nod. For the most part, his men had adhered to the book's strict guidelines on sanitation. The one rule in the goddamned handbook they had neglected to read was to either properly heat the water or treat it with alcohol before drinking. He had been reluctant to give his soldiers alcohol because he had seen firsthand how rambunctious they could get when intoxicated. Additionally, their strict and somewhat constrained supply chain was unable to produce enough wood to produce the necessary amount of drinkable water and still transport enough food for the men to survive. Even so, it was obvious that saboteurs had compromised the water supply for the runs to spread through the garrison so quickly. And for killing nearly 70 samurai, the commandant would make sure the bastards were skinned alive and quartered if he ever managed to track down the guilty party. With the promise of grain, the watchstander at Konoha's messenger bird tower lured the recently arrived pigeon into her grasp. The bird approached steadily, pecking at one kernel after another, until the hands of the watchstander suddenly descended from behind and grasped its neck. Noticing the bird's breed, she called out, "Sasaki-san, one of the special pigeons just came in." With a frown on his face, Sasaki, the middle-aged person responsible for looking after Konoha's messenger birds, came out of his office. The unique pigeons, for which there was no official name or breed, were the result of experiments conducted by Konoha himself following the village's founding. The aim was to develop a superior breed of homing pigeons with the ability to fly faster and higher than existing ones. The initial outcomes were all failures, but Leaf had achieved success about 40 years prior and had since enjoyed the rightful benefits. The caretaker picked up the bird and said to the watchstander, "That'll be all. Return to your duty." "Yes, sir." After giving a nod, Sasaki headed back to his office, contemplating if he would prefer pigeon soup or roast pigeon for dinner. He was relieved that he was no longer a practicing shinobi. After all, none of the news that the special pigeons had brought back to Konoha had ever been good. Shaking his head, Kakashi glanced at the 3 golden pips tucked into the Anbu intelligence captain's hand. Exhausted, he asked his Anbu advisor, "Yet another confirmation?" He had spent the entire day buried in paperwork and meetings, making it an exhausting day. Why couldn't his intel chief see that further proof of Kumo's involvement in Suna's betrayal was unnecessary? "I don't think we need any more confirmation that Suna and Kumo have got it in for us. This one's from Grass, Hokage." Sama, the commander wearing a mask, said solemnly in response. Kakashi straightened his back in his chair. Grass was synonymous with Iwa, and those bastards were hard to deal with. He questioned, "Grass? Are you sure this is correct?" Finally, sadly, "Of course, you are. You wouldn't be here if you weren't disturbed by this news. It was one of our sleeper agents in Grass that sent this, sir. There are 4 more, but we've received no confirmation from the others. We're trying to obtain independent confirmation now." Kakashi gave it some thought. "We'll forward the message to the daimyo, of course, but with the addendum that we haven't got independent confirmation on this one." "Yes, Hokage." "Sama, what's the status of our units on the Grass border?" "Weak," was the Anbu commander's response. "Grass being one of our oldest and staunchest allies, we maintain several nominal garrisons on their border, as you're no doubt aware." Adding, "And they are garrison troops in the truest sense of the word, too." Even the shinobi compliment, Kakashi became less certain with each passing sentence. "I'm afraid it's much worse, sir." "Oh? We sent a communique 2 days back to move some of those troops to reinforce the garrisons on the border of Rain and River." Kakashi let out an inward moan. An enemy was about to launch a surprise attack to take advantage of a commander's weakness on one of his flanks, which was precisely what a commander wanted to hear on the eve of a war. "Now I know why you hurried here with this message. How bad is it really on the border?" "The forces are spread thin, Hokage. Sama. The Western Highway and the provincial capital are well defended, and we can hold them against even a full-scale attack, but everything to the west of the highway is exposed and vulnerable." With a grim nod, Kakashi turned to face his assistant. Fire had relied on its enduring ally Kusa no Kuni to support it during the upcoming conflict, and every indication from the Grass Court suggested that this was unquestionably the case. Consequently, Hai no Kuni's planners had assumed it was acceptable to order some of the troops stationed on the Grass border to the hot frontier with River, Aim, and Taki, since Kusa's loyalty was guaranteed and Grass had not indicated any hostile moves on the part of Iwa, nor had Konoha's spies within Earth indicated otherwise. They were now going to have to pay for their error. He said to the Chunin, "Send for Jiraiya. Sama. Tell him that I need his advice." To the commander of the Anbu, "We'll continue this meeting in another 30 minutes with Jiraiya, Sama sitting in. In the meanwhile, see to it that the messages to the daimyo as well as the garrison commanders are prepared. Most importantly, we need independent confirmation of Kusa's betrayal. Work to expedite that." The commander of Tsuchi no Kuni lifted the teacup to his mouth and sipped. It was perfectly hot, just the way he liked his green tea. "It goes good?" he inquired of his colleague from Grass. After finishing the last piece of sushi, the Grass nodded. "Surprise is almost complete. Fire has little or no idea that we're coming at them." Inoue.san. With a pleasant smile, Brigadier Kanao Inoue, who led the task force consisting of 4 regiments, entered Fire. "You didn't get to surprise your opponent like that very often. 3 years prior, in the Chunin exams held in Leaf, Konoha had defeated Orochimaru with it, and you can see what happened to the Snake Sanin." "I concur," he conceded, "which brings us to what we're going to do about our advantage. The agreed upon timetable is a week from now." The liaison questioned, "You intend to advance it, Brigadier?" "Yes, I do. Tell me, how soon can your troops be ready to launch an attack?" The Kusa colonel took a few moments to consider it. "I can have them prepped for an assault by mid-morning tomorrow." With a smile, Inoue said, "Let's not rush the men. Given their dispositions, the fire pussies will need at least 3 days to concentrate before they dare challenge us on the open field. And that's once they learn about my men and I. They'd have learned it from the farmers by now, which means we have plenty of time to organize our forces," the colonel of Kusa said. "Dawn day after tomorrow sound good to you then?" "Yes, I think it does." Rising from his bow, Junin Rensuke Isegai gave the scroll delivered by the signal people to Kei's no Kuni's daimyo. The ruler of wind gave a curt nod to his Junin guard, the only one out of the dozen in his security detail that was visible, and skillfully unfolded the scroll. After finishing, the daimyo placed the message next to him and faced his guard. The message was sent by Koiso, who had seen some of the captured Kumo and Suna shinobi and had been notified by Danzo of the capture of the two-tailed Jinchuriki. The daimyo was getting tired of Danzo and his group of murderous troublemakers, as Danzo's sheer insolence was unbearable. Isegai-san. "Yes, Lord. I want to send a message to Suna as well as the units hemming in Danzo and the feckless fiends of that madman. It must reach the concerned parties before nightfall, today." "It'll be done, Lord." The daimyo gave it some thought. The message is simple. The cripple has declared war on Wind. Our forces are to rescue the hostages held at the old war. Cripple's fort. Towards this end, they will attack the fort and take it. Tell them I want Danzo's head on a pike before the end of the week. "Yes, Lord." "Good." Apart from a few ants here and there, not much remained alive on the desert floor due to the extreme heat. There was no humidity at all and no wind. Just then, one of the ants scampering across the desert floor came to an abrupt stop when a rubber-soled foot trod on it. Its enemy took a minute to crack his neck and spit on the ground, so the ant died unnoticed and unremembered. The man swore, "I hate this fucking desert." The mercenary, the man's partner, glared at the psychopath. That the target of his wrath seemed impervious to his rage was standard asshole behavior. "I mean, I get the whole fucking dead zone, devoid of all life and all that crap, but honestly, this sucks. There's simply no fucking thing to kill around here. How's a man supposed to worship his god when there aren't any fucking sacrifices around?" With gritted teeth, "I'm growing weary of your incessant grievances, Hidan," the hired gun responded. His wish to rip his friend's throat and trample on his grave went unspoken. That part was understood implicitly because he'd tried and succeeded in doing just that the day before. "Like a servant of the god could expect anything better from a godless heathen like you coin. Counting whore," Hidan replied. With a snort, the mercenary suppressed the raging anger that was about to explode. "Think what you will," Hidan warned him, "but you're approaching the point where I grind you to paste and feed you as pig slop. We'll see how you enjoy your immortality as pig shit." In response, the psychopath spat on the ground, as if there was any chance at all for a heathen to murder a true disciple. He questioned, "What are we going to do, Kakuzu? We have been on station for more than a week now, and if there's been a second patrol of those Konoha pussies in our general direction, it didn't come within a dozen miles of us. The fucking cowards." It was the same question that Kakuzu had been arguing over. As far as he knew, no squads had been sent out on their flank since Hidan ran riot among the Leaf Patrol and the heavily armed force arrived to retrieve the shredded corpses. This was problematic because Danzo and Hidan had been ordered by the Akatsuki leadership to weaken the war cripple, which they couldn't accomplish if the latter avoided them, and because there was an unofficial bounty on the heads of each of Danzo's men in Wind. "Well, I guess there's only one thing left to do. If they refuse to come to us, then we go to them." Inuzuka Sume inquired, "How are you, my poor baby?" Kiba gave his mother a hazy smile. Just moments before, he had woken up from a drug-induced coma and wasn't exactly clear on what to think. He stammered, "I'm feeling great, Mom. How's Akamaru?" Sume tried to hide her thoughts as she studied the bandages covering Kiba's amputated right hand stump. She had seen Kiba's dog earlier, and Akamaru was in even worse shape. She faked a smile and said, "He's doing fine." She began to say more, but an Anbu wearing a mask cut her off and told her to wait outside the room. Under the influence of painkillers, Kiba had witnessed the Two Tails capture firsthand, and Konoha wasn't going to take any chances that he would reveal this information. Sume gave her son a quick glance before leaving, breaking down in tears. Although the amputation was done without incident and the medical staff assured her that her son would recover completely by the end of the week, Kiba's career as a front-line shinobi was over, and with it, his dreams. Of course, the shepherd had good reason to be afraid. He faced the commandant while standing in the middle of an armed military camp. For the 7th time, the young officer asked incredulously, "You're serious?" Although Major Toshiaki Mukai was a friendly and Like man among the women, he was not a suitable candidate for an officer. Not by a long shot. In the Fire Daimyo's court, his father was a somewhat powerful nobleman who had gained his position through patronage. By now the shepherd would have taken a belt to the imbecile's scrawny ass if the idiot had been one of his sons. However, he was helpless because there were samurai nearby and the idiot was the son of a noble. Yes, Lord. A combined Kusa and Tsuchi army is amassed near the border. My son.in.law heard Earth Country samurai in the woods this side of the border when he was returning with firewood this morning. The major, no intellectual heavy himself, said to his adjutant, "The poor bloody fool is scared out of his wits." The XO gave a calm nod. Mukai was, of course, correct. Just as he had always been. Most likely, the shepherd was a hysteric. The shepherd gave a headshake. In addition to wanting the reward money he believed the samurai would give him, he had come to the camp because he was a fire patriot and did not want the barbarians from Earth Country to live in the land of his ancestors. However, his message was not being heard. Alright, whatever. The samurai's duty was to protect the land from foreign invaders. If they could not be bothered to carry out their duty effectively, then shame on them and their clans. The shepherd was concerned about his family, and today he and they would travel to the closest walled city. I hope the garrison over there is better qualified than these cretins. With a cheerful smile, Sasuke stood up and stretched. Well, it's time for me to meet Danzo. Sama, he said. Naruto winced. Sakura inquired, what do you think he wants with you? The wielder of Sharingans shrugged. Don't know. Honestly, I'm more interested in how Kiba's faring. I'm sure he's doing fine, Naruto answered. Kiba.kun had nothing life-threatening, said Hinata, but I'm concerned about his hand. Sakura wrapped the Hyuga heir in her arm. Before they sent Kiba to Konoha, the pink-haired Kunoichi had examined him herself, and the bones in his hand had been ground into a powder. Not even Tsunade or Kabuto, in her opinion, could save it. Shino comforted Hinata, saying, don't worry, she had wept for her teammate and his dog for some time. Kiba's a survivor. I'll be back soon, declared a visibly uncomfortable Sasuke before walking away. Naruto turned to face Shino, eyebrow raised. You want to play shogi or something? I'm bored. So far, the meeting had gone quite well. So far, Danzo had only made small talk, but Sasuke sensed that he was being probed about a potential partnership and that this was more like an interview. Help yourself to another cup of tea, the elderly Warhawk said, raising the teapot to give Sasuke a drink. Sasuke answered, no, thank you, I'm stuffed. Danzo put the kettle away after giving a nod. So, tell me, are you satisfied with your position in Konoha? He asked. Sasuke gave a sly smile. After all, this was an interview to see if he could be bought. Though he would have normally gone for Danzo's throat, he had been asked to leave the old fool alive by Kakashi Sensei. So he would put up with the stupidity of the crippled cane-wielding idiot. Very much so, to tell the truth, it's very exciting. And your personal life? What's there not to have? My team is my family and I have great friends and teachers. Danzo gave the response a sardonic smile. Kin, how funny. Indeed. What then of revenge? Sasuke's smile started to dwindle. It'll come when in due time. The Uchiha will be avenged before the clan arises from the ashes once again. It's really unfortunate, Danzo said. Oh? Yes, it'd be such a shame to kill your brother. Now, Sasuke's eyes flashed with anger. Permission to speak freely, Danzo. Sama, he replied. This is a conversation between an officer of the ninja corps and a clan leader. You may feel free to speak as you will without fear. Uchiha, with raven hair, gave a curt nod. Very well. If you value your life even a little, you'll apologize for your ill-advised comment regarding the murderer, or I'll call you out and strangle you with your entrails. Danzo grinned. My apologies if I've hurt your sensibilities, Uchiha. Dono. It is sad that you hate your only surviving kin so. Kin? Sasuke asked icily. He murdered my parents. He massacred my relatives. He made me relive their deaths 1,000 times as a child that night. I assure you, the crazed murderer is no kin of mine. Well, as you say, he murdered your parents. He massacred your relatives and for whatever reason, he made you relive their deaths 1,000 times. But was he crazed or did he do it for a reason? Sasuke's eyes grew even more narrowed. What do you imply? What if I told you that your brother is perhaps the greatest patriot of Fire Country that's alive today? Replied Danzo. Raising his voice a little, Sasuke answered, he's a murderer and a lunatic. He's a patriot who executed your clan because they were plotting treason. He did so at the behest of the third Hokage, one of the teachers you so love. Sasuke's eyes widened into pinwheels as he braced himself, ready to unleash his seal of power. The cripple's audacity to accuse him of besmirching his clan's honor and damaging both theirs and the Sandame's reputation is astounding. Don't you want to know the truth of that terrible night, Uchiha? Listen to me and then decide whether you want to act rashly or not. You have 2 minutes, Sasuke uttered, gathering his composure and discharging the euphoric force bestowed by the seal, albeit sparing his Sharingan. If you fail to convince me, your life is forfeit for treason against the Godem by virtue of attempting to suborn his shinobi against him. With a laugh, Danzo snarled and waved his guards away. No tailed beast has ever attacked any village, Uchiha. Dono, except the 9 tails. Did you ever wonder why it attacked Konoha some 15 years ago? Asked he. Sasuke agreed with a nod. Indeed, he had pondered. Hell, during their training, Sakura had even posed the same query to Jiraiya. Sensei. The Sannin was unable to respond to her back then, and he was likewise at a loss for words when it came to the elderly cripple. Then consider this. The Kyuubi ignored the traps we set, the obstacles we built and the resistance we offered that day. With a frown, Sasuke did not respond. However, his thoughts strayed to Sakura's conversation with Jiraiya regarding the matter. So tell me, is it normal for any rational animal to venture into danger when there is safety ahead? There's no need to respond because the answer is clear. But Uchiha, that's precisely what the 9 tails did. This gave rise to concerns that it was under control. Now, in recorded history, there have been 2 approaches to controlling the Kyuubi, and both have depended on bloodlines. Specifically, the Uchiha Sharingan and the Senju Mokuden. Moreover, the Mokuden never drove a creature with tails insane. You'll acknowledge that the evidence suggested the Uchiha. Sasuke gave a snort. That isn't proof. At best, it is speculation, and a tenuous one at that. Here's another interpretation. Even in this day and age, new bloodlines are emerging. Is there one that has the potential to rule the Kyuubi? Or perhaps a more straightforward one? Kyuubi lost his mind. It is a common behavior for animals in the wild, you know, and not only from the rabies virus. Danzo admitted, that's true, but your clan was killed years later. The tale has only just begun. Would you rather hear the rest of it or would you rather try your hand at assassinating me right away? Should it be the latter, I can assure you that you will fail. Tell me about it, Snake. Charmer, Sasuke shot back. Again, Danzo roared with laughter. After the 9 tails were defeated, there were deep-seated suspicions about the Uchiha. And they knew it very well. They were passed over for opportunities and promotions. The clan compound was designated for the Watchers. The Uchiha police were given less authority. Your brother Itachi, the clan prodigy, was weaned from the elders and brought up in Sarutobi's midst. Your clan sent feelers, but they were turned down. There was going to be no giving in. Itachi was ordered to carry out an execution. He was to sacrifice his honor and your clans in order for the third to be able to get rid of one of the main political blocs in Konoha. What else was your clan to do in such a situation? What else could they do? The Sandame forced them to plot revolt and so they did. This is what happened, Uchiha. Dono, and this is the true face of your masters. Sasuke's face was marred by a frown. There wouldn't have been a written order like that. How are you aware of this, Danzo? Sama. Sasuke did not doubt that there was some truth in the story, but he needed to know how much was fact and how much fiction. It was obvious that the cripple was hiding something, but what was it? I stood up against Sarutobi, Homura, and Kaharu's plan to kill your clan when it was being planned. I was unable to change the Uchiha's decision because they had served the village with too much loyalty to be rewarded with betrayal. Sasuke gave a snort. Yes, woe be you, he said, turning to leave. He could think through a lot of things better with his family by his side, like what to do if Danzo was telling the truth. What would Sakura and Naruto do? Should he forgive Itachi, and should they leave Konoha? Wait, Uchiha. Dono. Sasuke pivoted. You do realize that your life is forfeit if Konoha finds out that you are aware of the truth about your clan, doesn't he? Danzo inquired. Of course. All right, then. I hope you'll think about what you've learned today and decide wisely about whether you want to avenge the deaths of your clan or serve the people who killed your family. Yes. Danzo gestured for one of his guards to follow Sasuke out. Pay attention to that one. Take out all 5 of them with poison if he steps wrong. Even though it made him feel sick to his stomach, Sasuke tried to shake the feeling that he was missing something obvious as he stalked back to his teammates. His eyes glinted with anger at Danzo's insinuations, but he could not deny that the old cripple's argument sounded reasonable to him. If Itachi wasn't a crazy murdering bastard, then Sasuke's life had no meaning because he'd built his life around the vow he'd taken to avenge his clan's senseless murder. And what of his teachers and friends? For the past 2 years, old man Sarutobi had been Sasuke's and the other 2 members of Team 7's grandfather, guiding and caring for them as they matured into young adults. Could that gentle old man have ordered the Uchiha clan's murder, as Danzo claimed? What about their teacher, the current Hokage Hitaki Kakashi? Did he also know of the Uchiha clan's betrayal? And Jiraiya? Was his entire life a lie, and his family and friends were actually his sworn enemies concealed behind an act of kindness and concern? Sasuke took a moment to realize where his thoughts were going and shook himself out of them, but eventually he could convince himself that Itachi was a patriot because he could still remember the kind older brother who had loved him before the massacre. He would still kill his brother, of course, if only to restore the clan's tarnished honor, but if Itachi was no longer a monster, he could forgive him from the bottom of his heart. Though Sasuke had received the last 2 from Itachi on that fateful night as well, he had long since realized that their pursuit would have led him down a path of no return and truly destroyed the Uchiha clan. This way, the way his friends had taught him, was better, and like a phoenix rising from the ashes, it led to the rebirth of the Uchiha clan and something approaching normalcy in his life. Certainly, Naruto and Sakura were as close to Sasuke as Itachi or his parents ever were. And they'd shown him nothing but companionship and love. All of that logic, though, was ultimately meaningless because Sasuke was possessed by an insatiable curiosity about the truth, and as he lifted the tent flap, he realized he had made a mistake that, at best, would earn him some broken bones and, at worst, Sakura's gentle caresses. The tent flap returned to its original position behind him, and the blonde's blue eyes made contact with the spinning crimson irises of his Jujutsu. "Naruto, please forgive me," he whispered as he was carried into Naruto's mindscape, where he found himself facing the Kyuubi in its enormous cage, his brother and friend beside him. The beast appeared even less amused than usual to see the blonde once it realized who it was. While working on some routine paperwork, Sarutobi was interrupted by the toad emerging from the trough that had been set up in a corner of the room specifically for that purpose. Realizing that he only had a few seconds remaining, the retired Hokage quickly skimmed the executive summary of the next document in the pile and signed it, then carefully put down his brush and spoke to his guest. "I wish I could say that your arrival is unexpected, Jiraiya. The Sanin eyepiece. Sensei, you are already aware of the Tsuchi invasion force?" he questioned his senior instructor. Sarutobi was the one who looked surprised. "Kuni no Tsuchi. Tell, please. I had assumed you would stop by to talk about the alliance between wind and lightning. Well, throw in earth and grass into the mix as well. The 4 elemental nations combined might against Hai no Kuni. The circumstances are grave. Sensei, it's worse than you realize. That inept fool Mukai, Toshigaki's son, is the officer in charge of the grass border." Sarutobi was aware of the concerned officer, Mukai, a political appointee whose father, the Lord Toshigaki, had bought him a commission as an officer in the Hai no Kuni army. Mukai's superiors quickly realized they had a fool on their hands, but the Lord Toshigaki had spent a great deal of money to guarantee his son's promotion to officer of the line and had summoned many of the political favors he had carefully gathered over the years for this exact purpose. As a result, the Hai no Kuni general staff adhered to tradition and sent him to the most remote border, grass. "That's bad," Sarutobi said, frowning, realizing how much Mukai had screwed up the situation with his hands. "The situation at the border with grass is terrible. The regular army units are terribly out of position, and the invasion is almost upon us. The enemy has an open path to the Hai no Kuni hinterland, and our nin units are overextended. In other words, we have exposed our jugular," Sarutobi grumbled. "I suppose the Godem put you in charge of defending the grass border." "Yes, that's the reason I came to see you. I require Anko and her group. I've dispatched them to Rice all ready to reinforce Hanzaki's troops to defend the Kumo front." "Sensei, Hanzaki will have to sell for what he has, haha. I'm sure he can hang on for a week or 2. On the border with the grass, we don't enjoy that luxury. We urgently require strong players there." Sarutobi took up his brush and took out a new piece of parchment. Yes, I understand," he said, "but I can't leave the Kumo border as is. We need some big players to keep the younger brother of the Raikage occupied because by all accounts, he has complete control over the Hachibi." Sarutobi scowled as Jiraiya pointed out evenly, "Iwa's got 2 berserk Jinchuriki on their hands and they're going to be deployed against Mukai. After a while, I'll ask Anko-chan to loan you 2 companies of her unit," the retired Sandame remarked. "That leaves her with the 2 companies that remain." I'll be sending whatever I can scrape together to Rice, so hopefully the Godem keeps his promise to send reinforcements to the grass border. I guess that will have to suffice. I assume you don't currently know where Enko and her unit are located. Between here and the border with Rice, check at the depots. If I were you, I would begin at the halfway point, Sarutobi retorted, giving Jiraiya his commands. All right. Regards, Sensei. The Gopher told Kase of Kuni's chamberlain, Lord, the ambassador from Kumo craves the boon of an audience with the daimyo. When Kumo's emissary approached the court with this request, Wind needed to defeat Danzo before the daimyo faced the worthy, and the daimyo had given Wind very clear instructions on what he was to do. With that in mind, the chamberlain scrunched up his face, figuring he could guess why the ambassador would want to meet with him. Tell him the daimyo is currently indisposed and will meet him at the earliest. Moments after Sasuke and Naruto materialized inside the latter's head, the blonde's fist struck the former's face with the force of a wrecking ball. Naruto glared down at Sasuke as he lay clutching his jaws after he had spun into the air and splashed back down. Naruto growled angrily, Sasuke, when this mission is over, I'm gonna rip you apart for what you did just now. Sasuke, who had foreseen the consequences of his actions, said, okay, seeming resigned to his fate. Naruto's gaze grew strained. Asshole, is that all you have to say? I'm sorry, Naruto, but I had to confirm something and the Kyuubi can give me the answers I seek. You could have asked, said Naruto. You didn't have to Sharingan into my mind without permission like that. I'm truly sorry, Naruto. You're not, that's for sure. Not at this moment. You will regret this mission, though, I promise. I apologize for ever violating my mind in such a way. Sasuke appeared as remorseful as the blonde had ever seen him, but he was mistaken if he believed it would spare him from what was coming. Sasuke remained silent in response. Naruto gave a disgusted snort. Let's finish this up. What are your desires? Kyuubi. Naruto said, then, Kyuubi, you'll meet, in a decisive manner. In an instant, the pair of teenagers winked out and materialized at a different end of the network of tunnels that served as Naruto's mindscape and chakra system. The Kyuubi saw Naruto and Sasuke standing before its cage and snarled, pitiful worm. You dare approach me bearing your accursed eyes. The Kyuubi did not like Sasuke at all. In fact, it hated him more than it did Naruto or the Ondaime, which was saying something. As the beast struggled to break free from its prison and crush Sasuke to dust, its chakra started to push against and out of the cage to poison the teenager. The beast's struggles came to an end as Sasuke's Sharingan spun quickly and bore into the Kyuubi's eyes, captivating it for a few seconds before its chakra flowed back into the cage. Naruto was amazed by the beast's docile behavior, even though he had witnessed Sasuke perform this move multiple times during training over the previous 2 years. Kyuubi, tell me why you attacked Hai no Kuni, Sasuke questioned, keeping his gaze fixed on her. The tailed beast answered in metronome, one from your accursed clan, the one whose chakra is even more vile than mine, the one whose eyes are as powerful as yours made me. The admission surprised Naruto, who could understand why Sasuke had acted that way with his Sharingan. Madara Uchiha. If he took his eyes away now, the Kyuubi would be even more of a bitch than it usually was. And as far as he knew, Madara was the only other Uchiha who'd ever been able to control the Kyuubi in any way, the boy with raven hair asked, ignoring his teammate for the moment. The name of Sasuke's ancestor caused the Kyuubi, who was under the Sharingan spell, to growl. With a nod and a deactivation of his Dujutsu, Sasuke had all the proof he needed to confirm what old man Sarutobi had told him. With Sasuke gone from his mind, Naruto staggered, all the more startling because he knew from experience that it had only been a few seconds since his friend had dragged them both to meet the Nine-Tail. Sakura turned to face him, worried, but Naruto shooed her away, flashing the security hand sign, and she nodded, knowing that it would take a seal master an additional 10 minutes to break the seals she put on the room the moment she saw Sasuke use his Dujutsu to catch the blonde. After giving her a nod, Naruto focused on the current issue. Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, and Shino observed from the sidelines with curiosity. It's gotta be a lie, Sasuke, he said. I don't think so, Sasuke shot back. He died more than half a century ago at the Battle of Valley of the End, replied Naruto. There haven't been more than a handful of people in the history of the elemental nations, myself included, who could control the Kyuubi, Naruto. Sasuke, he's passed away. The Nine Tails are not under your control in the spirit world. What happens if he isn't? The boy with the raven hair shot back, his body was never found. What topic are you two discussing? At last, Sakura entered the conversation and spoke for both Shino and Hinata. She knew about the Battle of Valley of the End, Kyuubi, and the boys' situation. Sakura, later. Naruto answered, I swear, I'll let you know as soon as I personally learn what's happening. The Kunoichi with the pink hair turned to face her other teammate. Sasuke? Sasuke turned his back on her to concentrate on his other teammate. I have Sarutobi Sensei to meet, bring me over there. Naruto gave a headshake. He muttered to Sakura, he won't answer you, Sakura, and made 2 clones into decoys. You're being a stubborn and idiotic sob today, he said. The fool has lost his mind over us. Assume the role of the 2 of us and hold the fort while we're away. Before we go back, I'll send a toad ahead so you can make the necessary security arrangements. How much time will you be away, may I ask? She inquired. Naruto glanced at Sasuke, who was clearly upset. Not overly drawn out. This is definitely a fool's errand, he responded, calling upon Kosuke to accompany him. Do you need me already, boss? The toad inquired. Yes. Please bring Sarutobi and me to Sarutobi's place in T. Kensuke gave a whistle. Boss, that's a long way off. I require a larger bonus. I'll get you grasshoppers roasted to a crisp and dipped in chocolate. The boss must really want this favor to offer such a succulent treat, but Kensuke wasn't a born-yesterday tadpole, and he drooled at the offer. To what extent? A handful, but no more than a grasshopper, and only following my arrival back in the village. The hands of Sake-san. Not owned by you, they're not big enough. Naruto nodded, sulking, knowing full well that Sasuke would not even try to catch and fry the stupid insects. He would have to buy a D rank in order to obtain the little creatures. Come along, boss, Kensuke exclaimed, grabbing hold of the blonde and his companion to take them to tea. As Jugo mooned another villager, his teammates watched in a mixture of disbelief and humor. The man shook his head in disgust, cursed drunks in general, and turned his head away. That makes how many? The guffaws subsided as Karen questioned out loud. That's the 7th one, a voice said, but the reaction of that matron was a sight for sore eyes. Karen Riley shook her head. She growled, the bastard's fucking crazy, while Jugo continued to do something insane. Jugo yelled, watch this, Karen, right before he threw up into the middle of the road. Anko said merrily from her seat, he can't handle his liquor, but at least he's a happy drunk. Anyhow, the ass is going to have a terrible time marching tomorrow morning. We'll probably have to toss him on one of the wagons, the idiot, Karen said. Anko got up, motioned for Karen to follow her, and disappeared into a more sedate section of the bar, leaving the revelry in the background as Karen silently followed her commanding officer. Once they were out of sight, Anko said, you haven't shared your thoughts about our orders, and I know the look on your face. Are you hesitant about them in any way? Karen shook her head. She didn't mind going back to Rice Country. Some of the other survivors did, but she didn't mind going back to Rice either. However, thinking about Rice did remind her of Kimimaro, and how she and Kabuto had killed him with Jiraiya's approval after they turned themselves in to Konoha 3 years prior. The bone wielder had been entirely too loyal to Orochimaru, and it was in the best interests of both Konoha and his allies for him to pass quietly into the night. Once Kabuto had persuaded Jiraiya of that, the Sannin had looked the other way as they carried out the deed. With that murder, Kabuto had secured his position in Konoha's research division, and she had saved the lives of the remaining cursed seal-bearers who had relied on her. In all honesty, she did not mind killing the last Kagaya at all because, as she said to Jugo, the sky was the limit in Konoha's ninja corps as long as he worked hard and remained loyal to the village, and because Kimimaro's death had opened her up to a world of friendship and opportunity. No, if anything, I'm ambivalent about our orders. Anko said, it's clear that something is bothering you. What is it? She steered her superior's thoughts in a harmless direction, knowing full well that Anko, her current commander, was unaware of Karen's final act of betrayal following the surrender and that Karen had long since resolved she would take the truth of what had happened to Kimimaro to her grave. Orphans though most of us were, I've been thinking about how gullible we must have been that Orochimaru was able to suborn us to his cause so easily, Major. Anko nodded. Having herself once been taken in by the madman's spell, she knew exactly what the red-haired NCO was talking about. He always had a way with words. Karen concurred, saying, that he did. Anyhow, I'm glad he's dead. No one misses him for sure and certain, Anko smiled in response. She recalled how easily the Godem, Jiraiya, and Sarutobi had approached her to assume leadership of misguided children who had suffered at the hands of Orochimaru, just as she had. She had been more than happy to comply, and with the assistance of the research division and head shrinkers, she had gradually transformed the original survivors and other newly created bearers of the seals of power into a devoted battalion of Konoha Nin. That's true, Karen nodded once more, then observed that one of her people was approaching and said, "Yes, Hiro." "Sergeant, Jiraiya Sama is here to see the major," Hiro answered. "The former pervert. I wonder out loud, what's he doing here?" Enko asked. "I wouldn't know, Major." Enko gave a nod. "Well, Hiro, you'd better make sure to accompany him here, hadn't you?" Hiro turned to leave the bar by the closest exit, but it was pointless since Jiraiya had followed him in and introduced himself. They were on the field, and Enko was no fool to demand that her staff salute her in public and identify her for assassins. "Son, no need. I'll handle it myself," the Sannin declared. Hiro turned to look for more instructions from Enko, but she waved him off with a curt nod, and he walked out. "Jiraiya Sama, what brings you to our little corner of the woods?" she said, greeting the Sannin. Out of nowhere, Jiraiya produced a scroll and handed it to her, waiting patiently while the Enko read it and gave it to Karen. The major admitted, "You put me in a difficult position. I need every hand I can get. Hachibi is a monstrosity." "Orders are orders," and Jiraiya shrugged calmly. "We have a new front opening along the grass border with an invasion imminent and we need the forces, Enko. See how my people can't be of assistance there. Grass is a few days away. We would be better off bringing forces closer to the action to defend that border if it is undefended." Jiraiya retorted, "There are 3 reasons why your unit is doing that. Someone else is. First, you have a cohesive unit. Secondly, they possess the requisite firepower. And third, you won't believe how quickly I can get them to the front." "Do I really want to know how you're managing to do it?" "Not at all. Need to be aware of everything. My estimation. Make sure Jiraiya Sama receives our 2 finest companies, Karen." He only needed to ask the red-haired Kunoichi one question before Jiraiya and Karen left. "Aren't I going to take your 2 least strong companies?" Karen gave him a cheery grin. "Yep." The Sannin let out a sigh. "What I thought. You 2 should be in K's no Kuni right now, don't you?" With a sharp gaze, Sarutobi questioned the 2 boys who were in front of him. Naruto gave Sasuke a fierce look. "We are, sensei." Then, in relation to your area of operations, what are you doing here? The retired Hokage questioned sharply. "I had a meeting with Danzo and I learned a few things that brought me here, sensei," replied Sasuke. Sarutobi gave a contemplative nod. "Tell me what happened during the meeting." When Sasuke reached the part where he explained how he had entered Naruto's head without his consent and confronted Kyuubi, Sarutobi listened silently for the entire story and scowled in disapproval. Finally, he asked, "And you suspect that we lied to you?" Sasuke appeared uncertain as he shook his head. "No, I don't," Sarutobi prodded. "Go on, spit it out," noticing the teen's reluctance. "Well, my family were either traitors or innocent victims killed by a lunatic. If it's the former, then honor them, sensei, and I'll track my brother down like a crazy dog. Should it be the latter, they betrayal. They were inept individuals, and they deserved what happened to them." Sarutobi gave a nod. "Thing is, if they are traitors, then like Danzo said, my brother's a patriot and he's been dealt a shitty hand at life. And you're curious about your brother because even after what he did to you, you love him just as you hate him." Sasuke gave a nod. "Excellent. Sit, this will take some time," muttered Sarutobi. "I would prefer not to have to tell you or anyone else who wasn't in the compartment, but I would also prefer not to have you go out and discover one of Konoha's most sinister secrets on your own initiative. You and your group will undoubtedly be killed by it. I will thus give you access to the compartment as I am its owner. Keep in mind that information about the incident is classified as Deep Purple, the highest level for military and state secrets. There is no way what I tell you will get past Team 7. I would say go outside and ask Naruto to leave, but since you are in Danzo's camp, I know you will share the specifics of our discussion with him and Sakura. And for that offense, I would prefer not to have the 3 of you put to death. Is that understood correctly?" "Yes, sensei," the boys repeated. "All right. Itachi is the epitome of a patriot. If the boy's life hadn't been destroyed by your clan's business, he would have been a good heir to me. You see, ever since Uchiha Madara went rogue and attempted to incite a clan revolt, ties between your clan and the village have always been tense. Indeed, it wouldn't be overstating things to say that things weren't exactly cordial from the village's inception. You see, when Senju Hashirama persuaded Uchiha Madara to unite their clans in order to construct the first hidden village, something never before recorded in the history of the elemental nations, the latter consented, believing that he would be the first among equals. Unfortunately for Madara, however, Hashirama also had similar thoughts, and unlike Madara, the Shodai was well liked by many of the clans, including the ruling daimyo of Hai no Kuni. As a result, your ancestor found himself a subject in this new village, a powerful one, but a subject nonetheless. The two founding fathers' egos collided more frequently over the course of the following few years. The Uchiha were mostly willing to be integrated into the village by the Shodai, but Madara insisted that the clans stay apart. It is generally believed in academic circles that Madara could not bring himself to be the servant of a man he regarded as equal, and that the Shodai could not be persuaded from this objective. Moreover, they were at odds over what should happen to the Biju. Between Madara and Hashirama, Konoha was in charge of every creature with 4 tails. In an attempt to establish a durable peace between the nations, the Shodai gave them away to the other villages, contrary to Madara's desire for Konoha to hold them all in order to guarantee our continued dominance. At this point, in one of history's great ironies, the Shodai offered the Uchiha clan the right to live apart from the village, which had been the cause of his falling out with Madara, to preserve the peace. Unfortunately, the gulf between the two founding fathers had grown too much, and with his clan turning against him, Madara refused to compromise and went rogue. Tensions between the two rose to the point that Madara became convinced that the village was no longer a good idea. However, his arguments for independence lost against the promise of peace the Shodai gave his clansmen. The Battle of Valley of the End ensued, and at its conclusion, history would have us believe that Madara was killed by the Shodai. However, it appears that he is still alive if your story is to be believed. Now, at first, the other clans accepted that the Uchiha was treated as the first among equals. However, as the village developed and became more powerful, voices of disapproval began to emerge from both the ranks and file of the Nin Corps and the various clans. This caused tensions between the village and your clan once more, though not excessively because the complaints were infrequent. Then the Kyuubi appeared. That attack weakened Konoha. The other clans wanted to firmly integrate the Uchiha into the village because they were afraid for their safety and had seen them through most of their survival. In official circles, the integration movement gained momentum with a large number of supporters. Naturally, your clan felt that this was an infringement on their customs and was offended by the calls. As time went on, relations continued to deteriorate, though as far as we have ever been able to verify, only the Uchiha had plans for taking up arms. In this climate, there was also the fear that the Kyuubi was directed at Konoha for the same reasons Danzo stated in your conversation. Therefore, when your clan argued vociferously against integrating into the village, the other clans began to think that perhaps there was credence to those unfounded suspicions about the Kyuubi's attack. After all, even though Itachi opposed plans for an armed insurrection against the village, Fugaku, your father, sent Itachi to infiltrate Anbu as an informant in this environment. Itachi only visited us at the very end of your father's scheme. Had he, maybe, I could have talked to Fugaku and persuaded him to change his mind. But it was too late by the time Itachi reported to us, realizing your clan was devoted to arms and could not be persuaded. We lacked the resources to battle your clan and then protect ourselves from the carrion eaters from Kumo or Iwa who would have attacked us after they sensed our weakness. Out of the ruling 4, I was the only one who believed a compromise could still be reached, but the other 3 in the village and the daimyo overruled me. Your brother volunteered for the decision to execute your clan with a first strike, even though it must have come at a great cost to him. He took action to save the village and restore lost honor and face because it was his duty as the heir to deal with his misbehaving relatives. He also did it out of a sense of honor. If it had ever been discovered that Konoha had ordered the Uchiha's execution, it would have bred a climate of fear and distrust among the other clans regarding their own future. We wanted to avoid such an environment at all costs, since it would have ultimately destroyed the village. Itachi offered to pose as insane with the intention of achieving this goal and preventing suspicion from ever falling on me or the council. On that fateful night, Sasuke, he was given orders to kill everything inside your clan compound, including the cats and dogs. Itachi obeyed the orders exactly, with one exception. He spared you. And before he left the village walls, he asked me to give you my undivided attention and to protect you from the actions of your people. He was very specific about this last request, in fact, threatening to take the lives of the other 3 ruling 4 members in the event that you were in an unfortunate accident. What more evidence do you need that your brother loved you deeply? I'd be the first to acknowledge that he had an unusual method of expressing his love, of course. We will never understand why he subjected you to such torture. If he had never used that rudimentary method, you would have pursued him relentlessly in order to restore the clan's reputation for being defeated by a single killer. Well, that's one of the 2 mysteries surrounding that day. Sarutobi. Sensei, thank you for your explanation. I owe you so much, Sasuke retorted gravely. Sarutobi gave a nod. What's up with Madara and the Kyuubi, now? Are you implying that Madara is alive and that our misgivings regarding the Nine-Tails' intentions weren't unfounded? He inquired. It seems like it, Sasuke answered. The Kyuubi verified it. Maybe, the retired Hokage pondered. Sarutobi didn't sound very sure he believed it, but then, he didn't know exactly how well Sasuke controlled the beast. Jiraiya didn't even know Sasuke's abilities, as Team 7 had never revealed that secret to anyone. Sasuke's Dujutsu allowed him to force the Kyuubi's chakra back. Sensei, you mentioned that there are two mysteries surrounding the day Itachi killed my clan. Which other is it? Sasuke inquired, changing the subject. Yes, it was evident from the forensic evidence that he wasn't acting alone. He was not alone, he had assistants. But we've never been able to identify them. Sasuke gave a nod. Sensei, what about Danzo? Now that you've told us, your superiors, about this, all three of you should act as though you're interested and forget about it. We'll manage the situation, Sarutobi answered. Naruto mirrored Sasuke as he nodded once more and got up from his seat. Thank you for this audience, Sensei. Thank you very much, Sasuke. You hear, you two take care of yourselves. Yes, Sensei. Once the boys had left, Sarutobi took up his papers and started writing a new letter, this time to the Godime Hokage as well as the daimyo. It was obvious that Danzo's conceited ambitions had finally reached a point where he had lost what little common sense he had ever had, and that there were plenty of dark secrets in Konoha's closet besides the execution of the Uchiha clan, and that he could no longer be trusted to keep them. The very nature of the secrets would cause friends to become enemies and alliances to be broken, and the security in this area could not be jeopardized. Danzo had to be buried. When Naruto and Sasuke returned, they saw that neither Shino nor Hinata was present, which did not surprise them. How are things going, Naruto? The ambush specialist and medic from Team 7 inquired. Protection? He inquired. Just now, I set up the lighting and audio in the room. It ought to last for about 15 minutes at most. Danzo tried to suborn me with a revelation about my family, Sasuke stated to her. I had to confirm it. But why did you use Naruto to wield the Sharingan? The Kunoichi inquired. Because it's been a while since I busted his bones and he misses it, Naruto responded tenderly. He was going to get Sasuke to pay for that offense at the appropriate moment. Furiously glaring at his misbehaving teammate, he said, Don't think that I'm going to let you off the hook because of today's revelations. Sasuke scowled. I know I screwed up, Naruto. Damn right, you did. Disregarding him, Sasuke faced his comrade. After we emerge from this snake's pit, I'll tell you all the details, but for now, let me just say that the Kyuubi attack was caused by my ancestor Uchiha Madara, who was one of our village's founding fathers, and that the rumors of his death were unfounded. In addition, it appears that my clan was put to death for organizing a coup against the village. The execution was carried out by my brother. Sakura gave a blink. And Danzo said this to Uyu, is that right, may I ask? She inquired. Less or more? We have personal confirmation from the Sandaime and Naruto's incorrigible but ungrateful guest regarding the Kyuubi attack and the demise of my clan. That made Sakura pause to consider the best course of action, but she could find none, so she turned to her teammate. You believe we should vanish, Nin? Sliding into a chair facing her teammates, she posed the question. Do we, Sasuke? Making eye contact with his friend, Naruto inquired, it's your decision on this matter. You too, don't be ignorant. We're not going anywhere. Our village is Konoha, and I will not, unlike my relatives, attempt to betray it in order to dishonor my ancestors. So we had better get started sucking up to Danzo immediately. Naruto responded with a small sigh of relief. It'd be wise to start slow and accelerate on the ass kissing as we go, for something tells me that a wrong step on our part is liable to earn us a poisoned meal, a slit throat, a garroted neck, or a dagger in the back. He knew he'd have left the village without so much as a backwards glance if that was what Sasuke wanted, as would have Sakura, but it would have caused some awkwardness later on. Sakura concurred, saying, that's for the here and now. What about the future? I need to find a way to start communicating with my brother. Given that we have no idea where he is or what he has been up to for all these years, that will be a bitch. Are you going to let him off? Naruto inquired. No, Itachi has a reason for wanting to die. I can't think of any other explanation for why he gave me his instructions that evening. He most likely wants to die like a dog for his transgressions against our clan. Naturally, I won't behave that way toward him. Not now that I am aware of the truth. But as reparation, I will assist him in performing seppuku. both within and outside of the battlefield. As his second, it is my obligation. And following that, Naruto, you heard the Sandaime. Without the Kyuubi attack, which so greatly stoked mistrust and fueled the unrest between my clan and the others, my clan would not have perished. After its attack, simmering tensions worsened to the point of no return. Never mind that when he had control over the Nine-Tail, Madara tried to destroy the village and my clan. Therefore, it is my duty to handle the rogue. Naruto laughed at what Sasuke had said. That's a relief, the blonde said with a smile to his teammates. There, I was a little worried that Sasuke's plans had changed. It would have felt akin to the end of the world. Sasuke growled and swatted at the blonde, saying, "They have, you idiot." No, they haven't. The fundamental idea remains the same. Find and kill relatives who commit mass murder. Naruto, I swear I'm going to choke you to death while you sleep one day. Sasuke shot back angrily. Sakura scoffed at that. Sure, they were facing a man with enough strength to challenge the Shodai from 60 or so years ago, and it was obvious as daybreak that the man's strength had increased with time, but her family's well-being was what mattered most of all. Her family was together, and that was definitely sufficient. Are the soldiers prepared? The Godem Kazekage questioned his employees at Anbu. Yes, Kazekage. Sama, the Anbu commander said in a whisper, having no face. Looking down at the 500 Anbu, Junin, Chunin, and even Genin that were arrayed into neat ranks on the ground below and lit up by numerous torches, the Kazekage realized that this was all the Ninsuna could muster up so quickly and that he was going to throw them at Danzo's camp. By sunset the next day, many of his shinobi would be dead, but Danzo's camp would also be reduced to the last rat, which the Godime thought was a reasonable price for the blood of these heroes. Brave shinobi of Sanagakure, the Kazekage said, for more than 3 years, the people of Kaz no Kuni have been forced to labor under the rule of Fire Country. During that period, the Fire Ninja have preyed on us by taking advantage of our vulnerability and raping, killing, and pillaging with impunity. Today marks the end of that period. We are stronger than before. Justice and righteousness are on our side, and we will prevail. The hidden village in sand and the land of wind are powerful. You've gathered here today to exact revenge for the blood that has been shed by your kin and fellow citizens. Collaborating with the samurai units encircling Danzo and his group, you will bring Danzo's stronghold down to the remnants of its former glory. You'll put an end to those rodents and track down those robbers and killers by any means necessary. Let not a rat settle inside those walls. The masked nin dropped to the ground and mumbled, Danzo. Sama, in time with the metronome. What information about our young Uchiha and his friends do you have to report? Giving me a glass of water, Danzo asked. Twice after his meeting, their tent was set up with lighting and audio. Both times for a duration of roughly 15 minutes. The Team 8 survivors who were a part of their unit weren't inside the tent the second time. And what do they currently do? They've put a rotating watch and turned in for the night. When the screens went out, what were they doing? Danzo inquired inquisitively. They were carrying on ribbing each other as usual. Danzo nodded, thinking that in retrospect it would have been better to use Shisui's gift on Sasuke during their meeting, but the risk of using the eye against a Sharingan prodigy hadn't seemed worth the reward back then. Maybe he should have. The fact that they used the screen told him they were aware of being watched or at least conscientious enough of security to act as if nothing had happened. In any case, he would watch the 3 nin tomorrow and then determine how to handle Team 7. Jiraiya grinned and said, well, kids, here we are. The Sannin disregarded the few members of his temporary command that had just crawled out from under Toads, looking grossed out, recalling their trip up and down the Krie's throats. The grass. Fire Border is located there, and it promises to be a lot of fun for us brave explorers. Much booze and Kuz does the same, he crooned merrily. Someone angrily said, yeah, lucky for us you brought us here to face 2 Biju, from the back. Another wiseass in the shadows shot back, hey, don't be so down. You ask me, fighting Jinchuriki is a definite improvement over being regurgitated as toad puke. Several people loudly agreed with that statement. Jiraiya half-heartedly complained, the whole generation's made of ungrateful brats, as he fixated on grass country. It's probably that brat Naruto's fault. That same day, at 4 in the morning, the first unit of the Iwa Grass Alliance crossed into the High no Kuni border, meeting with no opposition because Mukai's troops were fast asleep in their barracks.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.